Chapter 292. For Dragons. Old Yamant was shocked. Dani lifted her cloak, took out the warm red dragon egg from her pocket, and smiled at the old man. The other two help me guard Slaver's Bay, and soon, there will be 5. This. The old man looked at the dragon egg covered with fine red scales and was shocked beyond words. It's about to be born. Yamant's voice was dry. About a week. So fast? Baristan on the side was surprised. The last golden dragon egg was nearly 10 months old. This time, the dragon egg is hatched in less than 20 days. We have to wait for 10 months. Old Yamant smiled bitterly. Igo directly took the dragon egg and put it into the wildfire without delay. Well, Yamant's younger brother Igo, Aegon V, Dani and Rise's grandfather, was the perpetrator of the Midsummer Hall tragedy. Igo prepared 7 dragon eggs, a number of 7 gods, alchemists, fire wizards, and a large number of wildfire jars to hatch the dragon in the Midsummer Hall. What exactly happened at that time, even Xueqing didn't figure out. Some doctors thought that there was a rebellion, and some history doctors characterized it as a wildfire out of control. In short, except for the loss of the 7 precious dragon eggs, Igo, his eldest son, and eldest daughter-in-law, Prince Long Fu Lai and Jenny of the Barren Stone City, all died in the fire. Coincidentally, on the day of the tragic death of the first generation's man was the day of the birth of the second generation's man, Riga. That's right, Riga was born on the night of the fire in the Midsummer Hall, and he was even born in the Midsummer Hall. Queen Layla also participated in the dragon hatching ceremony. Even more coincidentally, not long after the death of the second generation Riga, the third generation's man, Rob, was born. Are they having a relay race? Or, like the reincarnation of Indra and Azura's chakra, that soul of the violation of the sacred marriage contract is also constantly reincarnating? Then, who can take over as the fourth generation's man? Well, the man who broke off the engagement must have a prominent background, at least at the level of the 7 great dukes. The Northern Pass, the Targaryen Pass, Dani Lys was born before Rob's death, the Hajin Pass. Wait, it seems that Idmore Tully, Lord of Riverrun, Duke of Hajin, Rob's uncle, currently imprisoned in Casterly Rock by Jaime, just happened to give birth to a son after Rob's death. This, shaking her head, Dani threw away these strange thoughts and said, the previous 4 dragon eggs all came from Asha. They were all fossilized eggs. This red egg once belonged to Targaryen. It was a dragon egg that was lost 2.5 centuries ago. The embryo inside is still partially alive. While Aemon was deep in thought, she asked again, Old Master, do you know how the Bravosi obtained this dragon egg? Bravos? Yes, they are planning to give the dragon eggs to the Volantis people, which means that Bravos must have more than 1 egg. 2.5 centuries ago. Old Yamant pondered. That Bravosi person said it himself. I see, I understand now. The wind blew snowflakes in front of the door. The old scholar could not help but tremble as he pulled the cloak on his shoulders. Dani immediately got up from the stone steps and led the old man to the fireplace in the king's tower. After drinking the warm milk that Baristan handed over, the old scholar sighed and said, Sigh, I am old now. Back then, I was immersed in stargazing on the Great Wall. I did not even realize that a night had passed. Do you know Princess Rhaenyra? There are many people named Rhaenyra. Which one are you talking about? The granddaughter of Aegon the Conqueror, the eldest daughter of Aerys I, and the elder sister of the king of Rhaenyra, Jaehaerys I. So it is her. Dani suddenly understood. Rhaenyra was also a legendary, weird, princess, a fanatic social butterfly. For a mere Iron Throne, the Targaryens did not hesitate to launch the Dance of the Blood Dragons. But why did those stupid ancestors never think of riding the dragons to the neighboring continent of Ursos to take over a piece of land and build their own Iron Throne? I don't know. Maybe we have been assimilated into this continent and have completely regarded ourselves as Westeros, unwilling to leave our homeland. The old man looked at Dani meaningfully. They are different from you. You have been wandering around since you were young. I am afraid you do not have such deep feelings for the Red Keep, the King's Landing, and the 7 Kingdoms. This is not a matter of deep feelings. Dany shook her head. For the family, the Iron Throne can only support 3 dragons at most, one for the king and one for the queen, and another for the crown prince. If the extra megalosaurus is not exported, it will inevitably lead to internal friction. On the contrary, if the Targaryens are allowed to spread throughout the world, even if usurpers inevitably occur, the Targaryens will not have to bear the threat of extinction. For the Westeros themselves, the less games there are for the Iron Throne, the better. The Targaryens and the 7 dukes are having fun, but the people are the ones who suffer. Look at the tragic state of the 7 kingdoms after the rebellion of the 4 princes. Dany Rise, you are wiser and more benevolent than us, than the Targaryens of the past. As powerful players, they simply do not see the lowly commoners in the mud. Old Ymont looked at Dany with a complicated expression. There was relief, sadness, and also longing for the future. Dong dong dong. Jon's voice came from outside the door. Master Ymont, your majesty, a messenger crow has flown in from the Shadow Tower. Barristan got up from the wooden chair with a fur cushion, opened the oak door, and welcomed Jon in with a thin layer of snow on his head. You're still keeping watch at the door? The White Knight asked. Jon stood at the door and shook off the white snow on his black wool cloak. He said casually, I'm not lonely with 2 dragons accompanying me. Most people can't even see a real dragon even if they want to. Barristan looked at him strangely. You're brave. You saw the megalosaurus burning the barbarians in the afternoon, and now you're not afraid at all. Jon smiled and did not say that not only was he not afraid, but he was also excited. He walked straight to the fireplace and handed a scroll as thick as a thumb to Scholar Ymont. The old scholar opened it and read for a while. He frowned and said, Commander Bowen Maxey encountered a group of 300 barbarians led by the Weeper at the Skull Bridge. Although the enemy was defeated, we lost more than 100 brothers. The commander was seriously injured and is receiving treatment in the Shadow Tower. Bowen Maxey was originally the chief affairs officer of the Night Watchers. When Elder Bear passed away and the new commander of the Night Watchers was chosen, he was appointed as the acting commander. Where is the Skull Bridge? Dany asked with a frown. The Grand Canyon beyond the Great Wall. We fell into a trap, didn't we? The main force was transferred away from Dark Castle, giving up the advantageous terrain of the Great Wall to fight the barbarians outside the Great Wall. Dany sighed. Yes, Mans Red sent small groups of enemies to harass the Great Wall at the east and west ends. To prevent the barbarians from crossing the Great Wall and entering the north, Commander Maxey had no choice but to clear the barbarians near the Great Wall. The Great Wall is too long and the Night Watchers are too few. It's impossible to monitor the entire 500-kilometer area. According to the usual practice, it's better to take the initiative than to defend passively, the old scholar explained. Since you know that the King of Savages is Mans Red and that Mans Red is familiar with all the fighting habits of the Night Watchers, why do you still follow the old rules? If it wasn't for Broken Palm Colin being smart enough, if it wasn't for Jon Snow being loyal enough, if it wasn't for Ygritte's love for him, if it wasn't for these almost unrepeatable accidents happening at the same time, the barbarians would have crossed the Great Wall and swept through the north. Dany shook her head and smiled. In her eyes, the offensive and defensive battle between Mans Red and the Night Watchers was like a chicken pecking at chickens. Starting from Old Mormont, the Night Watchers had made a few fatal mistakes. Mans Red had a powerful source of soldiers, but he was unable to create a regular army with basic military training. Of course, this had nothing to do with Mans Red's intelligence. His situation was very similar to that of the original Dany Rise. He was a child of a savage who was adopted by the Night Watchers and raised as a ranger from a young age. He had never received any formal military education. Yes, the Night Watchers only trained soldiers, and their officers were all from noble families of the 7 kingdoms. Chapter 293. Jon, do you know why I chased after that goshawk in the afternoon? Shapeshifter. Jon nodded and stroked the scar on his cheek with a complicated expression. In fact, I know it. It used to belong to Oriel. I killed him and his hawk scratched my face. I heard that the sixth form man, Valamir, inherited that hawk. The sixth form man, Valamir. Does he have 5 pets? Danny asked in surprise. Plus Oriel's hawk, maybe we should call him the 7 form man. 3 wolves, a shadow lynx, and a snow bear the size of a cottage. He is almost the strongest shapeshifter among the barbarians. Danny was speechless. Not only was he the strongest shapeshifter among the barbarians, but even in the whole world, that guy named Valamir had few opponents. Well, before the bug in Stark's family was born. Like Bran, he was definitely stronger than the sixth form man. Not to mention Bran, even Jon was afraid of the sixth form man, Valamir, because his talent was not even half of Jon's. How many shapeshifters are there among the barbarians? Barristan asked. At least 20, but they are not as strong as Valamir and can only control 1 pet. The strong ones can tame the shadow lynx, and the weak ones can only find a goat or a wild boar as companions. White Knight's expression changed drastically and she exclaimed, 20. 7 gods above, even a shadow lynx or a sparrow, if used flexibly, can change the final direction of a war. Before Danny and Robb appeared, the old man might not have had such worries. But he had personally experienced the Battle of Slaver's Bay and knew that information asymmetry alone could cause one side to be in a passive state, and the suppression of powerful legendary creatures on warhorses and workhorses would further increase this disadvantage. Even if the shapeshifter only controlled a sparrow, he could still sneak into the enemy's castle and eavesdrop on the commander's battle plans and the deployment of troops. How frightening was the advantage of having a complete grasp of the opponent's information? Not at all. Danny shook her head disapprovingly. 1 shapeshifter out of 1,000 followers of the old gods, 1 green prophet out of 1,000 shapeshifters. There are about 140,000 savages outside the city. Only a dozen shapeshifters are considered few. Jon hesitated. The northern region also believes in the old gods, but why, have I never heard of the shapeshifters? Danny looked at him and chuckled. Riding a horse to find a horse. Aren't you a wolf spirit? I'm not. Jon waved his hand and hurriedly denied, as if the Dragon Queen was slandering him as a villain or a monster. You're instinctively denying your own essence. Jon, I understand that shapeshifters have been demonized by the Undulls and the City of Knowledge. You don't want to be treated as a monster. But as a follower of the old gods, denying yourself and shapeshifters is equivalent to cursing out loud that the old gods are evil gods. The hexomorph Valamir is the strongest shapeshifter among the savages. But I heard from Yega, heard from the savages that when he was a child, he controlled the hunting dog at home to kill his own brother. He committed the crime of kinslaying. When he grew up, he took away his master's wolf, house, and territory. It's more hateful than breaking a sacred oath. He controlled a dozen villages nearby with his force. Anyone who dared to resist his rule would be torn apart by the wolves. He also used the shadow lynx to plunder the women in the villages. According to His Majesty, the gift of shapeshifters comes from the blessings of the old gods. Why would the old gods bless such an evil person? Jon said agitatedly. He agreed with Danny's statement. The shapeshifters were related to the belief of the old gods. But among the shapeshifters he had seen, none of them were good. Could it be that the old gods he believed in loved evil people? Jon, you misunderstood me. Danny gave Barristan a few instructions and explained, the gift of shapeshifters is the power of their blood. I'm not sure if it has anything to do with the old gods. It's just that in the old gods' belief, shapeshifters have the same status as priests. You can question the character of a shapeshifter, but there's no need to deny the profession system of the old gods' priests. Just like the Church of the Seven Gods, there are no less despicable archbishops than shapeshifters. But I believe in the seven gods, and it doesn't affect my pride in my identity as a bishop. Another simple example, I have the gift of witchcraft, but Sir Barristan doesn't. If both of us believe in the Light King at the same time, I don't need to be devout to become the Red God priest with mysterious power. But he doesn't have any power even if he's devout. Because he doesn't have the gift, his status in the Red God Temple is far lower than mine. Old Yamant said thoughtfully, this explanation is very clear and objective. To be honest, I've always been biased against shapeshifters. John's expression softened. He nodded silently and agreed with Danny's statement. He hesitated and said, "Then what should I do?" "Let's test your talent first." As they were talking, Baristan came back from the top of the tower with a long wooden box in his hand. Danny took the wooden box and opened it. She took out an obsidian crystal with silver-gray stripes and inserted it into the round hole at the bottom of the wooden box. She said to John, "This is a glass candle. Try it and see how long it takes to light it." "How do I light it?" John dragged a chair to the side of the table and looked at the obsidian crystal curiously. "Is this a dragon's heart?" "I found a package beyond the Great Wall with dozens of dragon's heart daggers." Yimont said slowly, "Dragon's heart is what the people call obsidian. The people of Valeglia call it frostfire. The reserves of dragon's heart on Dragonstone Island are huge. The Iron Throne can be put aside for now, but I must take Dragonstone Island immediately." "That's the Targaryen land," Danny emphasized. "What happens after that? Does His Majesty have soldiers stationed there?" Yimont asked worriedly. "What do you think of Tidehead Islands Valerian and Crab Island Satyr?" Danny asked. "As long as you appear in front of them on a dragon, their loyalty will not be a problem. However, during the rebellion of the Four Princes, they followed Stannis to King's Landing and suffered heavy losses. Tidehead Island only has a young count who is less than 10 years old. Count Satyr himself was defeated and captured. Duke Tywin put him under house arrest at King's Landing. I don't know if he has returned to Crab Island. 100 guards are enough. I have a dragon. Who would dare to attack Dragonstone Island with ships?" Danny said confidently. "You're not going back to Slaver's Bay." "Sigh, it's only 7,000 kilometers in a straight line. With Dragonstone Island's strategic location, it can't even last 3 days, right?" Old Yamant was stunned and asked doubtfully, "You're communicating with Dragonstone Island through magic?" "Yes, glass candle. Professor Marwyn has already pledged his loyalty to me. Not only is he a professor of the City of Knowledge, he's also a magician." "Magician, Marwyn?" Old Yamant had a strange expression. "I know. He has a bad reputation in the City of Knowledge." "Right, what's up with Professor Peristan? I noticed that your relationship with him is a little complicated." The old scholar asked again. Just as Danny was about to explain the City of Knowledge's conspiracy to the old scholar, a silver-gray ball of light suddenly filled her vision. Then, it suddenly exploded and the light was extinguished. "Ah!" John shouted in a daze. He rubbed his eyes and said in a daze, I. The obsidian lit up. I didn't touch it and it suddenly lit up. The legend is true. Glass candles can really light up out of thin air. Old Yamant said in disbelief. Danny looked at John seriously for a while and said slowly, "You lit up the candle in less than half an hour. Jon Snow, you are very talented. The faster you light up the glass candle, the more talented you are." John was proud and could not help but grin. He asked, "Your Majesty, how long did it take you?" "One look." Danny lifted her chin slightly and said lightly. What do you mean?" "I only took one look at it and the candle lit up steadily and persistently. The light was so bright and dazzling that even people a dozen miles away could see the strange phenomenon clearly. In the end, even the gods were shocked and came to the mortal world." Danny's tone was calm, but John and Yamant's faces were distorted. The corners of their mouths were twitching, and their eyes were saying, keep bragging, keep bragging. Whoever believes you is an idiot." She raised her eyebrows and asked, "You don't believe me? It's too exaggerated. It's completely unrealistic. I can't believe it even if I wanted to." Old Yamant smacked his lips and said fairly. Baristan said seriously, "It's true. I was there at the time and even had a great battle with the gods. At first, I was ready to rush up and kill him. Fortunately, Her Majesty stopped me. What the old knight meant was, if I had rushed up, I would have been done for. It's all thanks to Her Majesty the Queen's wisdom that I am still alive to talk to you. But in the eyes of John and Yamant, the once fearless and upright Baristan had gone astray. Not only was he a bootlicker, but he was also bragging without any bottom line. He was crazy about himself. Kill the gods? Most people would not dare to brag about this, but this legendary Iron Guard said it without batting an eyelid. John decided not to expose the two of them. After all, they were big shots. He changed the topic and asked, "Do I need to learn witchcraft?" Most shapeshifters communicate with animals instinctively. As long as you don't resist the identity of the wolf spirit, it should be easy to find your dire wolf. As for the meditation of shapeshifters, there must be some, but I don't know how to do it. At this point, Danny had a thought and smiled strangely. Did you receive any information from the glass candle? There are some strange runes. John said thoughtfully. You can try to cultivate. Don't go out to guard the door tonight. Just stay in the hall. I'll lend you the glass candle. John, on the other hand, thought that the Dragon Queen had passed on her ultimate tome to him. He hurriedly replied happily, "Thank you, Your Majesty." He wondered what would happen if the child of prophecy became a shadow binder. "Your Majesty, I see that you can communicate with the Megalosaurus without any hindrance. Are you a shapeshifter too?" Baristan asked curiously. Chapter 294. Screech. Blackie whizzed over the savages' tents, blocking the golden sunlight and casting a huge shadow. "Ah, the devil dragon is here." A spear-wielding woman milking a goat, a man in animal skin chopping firewood, a butcher slaughtering fat pigs. Even Mansred, who had walked out of his tent to ponder over the contents of the Dragon Queen's letter, looked up and saw the black dragon circling in the blue sky. His expression changed drastically. There were children wailing and crying, mothers calling for them urgently, barbarians swearing and pulling their bows with all their might, shooting arrows into the sky that were as fast as shooting stars but were weak and powerless. There were giants beating their chests and roaring into the sky with their spears, and there were mammoths letting out long howls that were as loud and clear as a siren, but none of these affected Danny under the blue sky. The golden fingers of the rising sun reached into the hazy white fog in the early morning. The vast ghost forest was in full view in front of her. In addition to the tall oaks, soldier pines, and iron trees, there were also many rivers and lakes embedded in the forest. The surface of the rivers was covered with a layer of ice and snow, reflecting golden light under the sun. In the silent forest, there were few birds and beasts, and there was no sound of flowing water. Except for the whistling of the wind caused by high-speed movement, Danny could not hear anything. She could not help but pat Blackie's back. Their minds were connected. The black dragon drew an arc downward and brushed past the treetops lightly. "Kacha, kacha." The sharp treetops bent and bounced up again, shaking off the snow, but there was still no sound of animals below. Are all the animals hiding? Are they all dead? Danny murmured. But she did not dare to continue. If the Night King threw an ice crystal javelin out of the forest, she would be in big trouble. Blackie quickly pulled up and once again entered the safe altitude of 1,000 meters. After circling the ghost forest, Danny did not find any deviant ghosts or zombies. She continued north. The trees on the ground became thinner and thinner. The sun was not weak, but the air was getting colder. After flying for 7 or 8 hours, Lin Luoran has circled the area within 1,000 kilometers of the Great Wall. Deviant ghosts seem to be afraid of sunlight and hide. Danny doesn't find any of them. However, she did not come out empty-handed. The snowy scenery beyond the Great Wall was magnificent, and the terrain was complex and changeable. She swam freely in the undulating valleys, slid across the freezing lake, raced with the shadow lynx in the snowfield, and competed with the white-headed goshawk in the sky. Danny had a sense of freedom, as if a divine dragon was roaming the ninth heaven. Especially in the Windy Sound Gorge, the gorge was deep and narrow. Sometimes, Blackie would turn its body sideways, its wings scraping the rocks on both sides of the gorge, causing snow to swirl in the air. Sometimes, it would lower its altitude to avoid the thick and long sparkling icicles above its head. Sometimes, it would spit out dragon flames to clean up the vines and rock trees that were hanging on the ice. Sometimes, the space was too small, so Blackie had no choice but to leap out of the gorge and fly parallel to the mountain ridge. Danny clenched the bone spurs on the dragon's back tightly. Sometimes, she would cry out nervously. It was her first time playing with such a complicated flight path, and it was especially exciting. Ah, Megalosaurus, it's really the Megalosaurus, the true dragon has been resurrected. Blackie approached the Great Wall. A large group of night watchers in black huddled by the battlements and shouted excitedly. Some of them even knelt down on the wall. Compared to when they left in the morning, there were dozens more night watchers on the wall. Hiss! Blackie swept past the cheering crowd and flew south for a distance before flapping its broad wings and landing in front of the king's tower. The main force of the night watchers is back? Danny asked as she looked at the curious night watchers in the yard. Baristan came over and said, "The night watchers of the Shadow Tower sent Bo and Maxie back. The night watchers who were patrolling the east are also back. This is Her Majesty Daenerys Targaryen." Old Ymont shouted to the night watchers in the yard. Danny jumped off the dragon's back and came to the stone steps. Nearly 200 night watchers in black either put down their work or came out of the tower, the stable, the smithy and the main hall after hearing the noise. They looked at the Megalosaurus beside Danny curiously and fearfully. After a moment of hesitation, some of them knelt down and saluted. With someone taking the lead, more and more people knelt down. Soon, almost everyone was shouting, "Long live Her Majesty the Queen, long live the Dragon Queen, long live the true dragon." The night watchers were shocked by the appearance of Targaryen and felt that the arrival of the legendary Megalosaurus was like a dream to them. However, they quickly accepted the reality. Other than peeking at the black dragon sleeping on the stone steps from time to time, they did not stop working. Danny looked around and asked, "Did Whitey go hunting?" "He flew to the forest in the east not long after you left," Baristan said. "Your Majesty, let me introduce." Old Ymont led a few night watchers over. Other than the one-armed Tanner, Danny did not know any of them. "This is Bo and Maxie, the Commander-in-Chief and also our General Affairs Officer," Old Ymont said as he pointed at a red and fat bandaged man who looked like a red pomegranate. Maxie's waist was injured, so he wrapped a thick white cloth under his woolen cloak. "Greetings, Your Majesty." The pomegranate man saluted cautiously. "Sir Dennis Mallister, the Commander-in-Chief of the Shadow Tower. Thank you for coming to the wall's aid, Your Majesty." He was a man in his 60s with a white beard. He was tall and strong, with a red face and a loud voice. His eyes shone brightly. He was similar to Baristan. Count Janos Slint. A short and strong man with a double chin looked at Danny with a twinkle in his eyes. "Count Slint?" Danny raised an eyebrow and said strangely, "Count Slint, you helped Lannister kill Ed Stark and killed Robert's 13 illegitimate children for Cersei. You must be Lannister's most trusted aide. I have a question that I don't understand. Can I ask you?" The man with the double chin blushed and stammered, Your Majesty, I am not that close to Lannister. I have already put on the black cloak. You can't punish me for my relationship with Lannister. Hee, where is the courage you had when you beheaded Ed Stark in front of St. Basil's Cathedral? Danny sneered. Jon argued, "I'm a spy. Colin told me that no matter what the wildlings wanted me to do, I was not to disobey. I had to do it. Then he told me to kill the wildlings for his trust, and I did it." "Who knows you're a spy?" Colin severed palm. "He told me to do it. He's dead. He died by your hands." Sir Elisa's excitement could be felt even by the Night's Watch who was watching the trial. "Do you think there's a turnip on my neck? You've said all the good and bad things. If I were a traitor, I wouldn't have gone back to Dark Castle to tell everyone to be on guard," Jon said angrily. Chapter 295. I told everyone to be on high alert. I killed countless barbarians with my own hands. I am not a traitor. Yes, thanks to John's reminder. He fought bravely and never showed mercy to the barbarians. One-armed Tanner nodded. Sir Alistair shook his head and pointed at John. That is because Her Majesty the Queen is here. Even a fool would not surrender to the barbarians after seeing the Megalosaurus. You know that the barbarians have been exposed. With so many villagers escaping to Dark Castle, Scholar Yamont and Master Tanner are not stupid. They must have been alerted. You pretended to be a spy for the Night Watchman, but you were actually planning to help the barbarians infiltrate Dark Castle. When the time was right, you would deal the fatal blow to the black-clothed brothers. Unfortunately, the gods protected the Westeros. Her Majesty the Queen descended from the heavens. You had no chance. You could only make the most beneficial choice for yourself: continue to be a spy. My father is the Duke of Winterfell. My uncle is a night watchman. I am from the north. John screamed with a twisted face. Why should I surrender to the barbarians? You are a bastard, a bastard. Slint slammed the table and shouted back even louder. You are only the bastard son of the Duke of Winterfell. Eddard Stark is a traitor. Before King Robert's body was even cold, he attacked his son, cough cough. Sir Alistair covered his forehead and coughed lightly. Unfortunately, Slint was too agitated and said all the things he should not have said. Cough cough cough. Slint also coughed violently. The hall was dead silent. He finally reacted. Lannister was still sitting on the Iron Throne, but the one sitting beside him was the Dragon Queen. I mean, crazy. King Aerys, I'd betrayed His Majesty and murdered Prince Rhaegar and his children. Eddard Stark is not a good person. You are his bastard, even worse. Your mixed blood induced you to get close to the savages and sleep with the female savages. You even admitted that you loved her before. In order to live happily with the savage bitch forever, it was natural for you to seek refuge with the savages, because the Night Watchers can't marry. Dany interrupted. The fact that Stark helped the usurper start a rebellion cannot be used as evidence of his crimes. You don't have to worry about me. Let's just talk about the facts. Slint nodded and bowed. John looked at her with a complicated expression. She continued, but don't say anything that's too ridiculous. Even a fool knows how close Eddard Stark and Robert are. He would never betray his sworn brother. The gratitude in John's eyes grew stronger. He didn't care how they treated him, but he couldn't stand the slander about his father. Your Majesty, I didn't say that Lord Eddard betrayed Robert's king. He betrayed Robert's son. Slint's chin trembled. His expression was firm. I tampered with Robert's will, intending to remove Joffrey from the throne and usher in Stannis on the Iron Throne. I swear he told me that himself. Eddard was also pitiful. He supported Stannis' succession to the throne and didn't hesitate to break off relations with Cersei. But how did Erlu repay Stark? Without a second word, without the slightest hesitation, he cast the Great Curse technique on his son, Robb, cursing to death the man who broke off the engagement with the third-generation head. Joffrey is the bastard son of the Kingslayer and Queen Cersei. My father knows of this, Jon said loudly. You dare to slander the Queen? Slint was furious. Ahem. Ser Alistair covered his mouth and coughed lightly. Slint stole a glance at Dany. He sighed in relief when he saw that her expression was normal. But with this interruption, he was at a loss for words. Ser Alistair took over the conversation and scolded Jon loudly. I've seen through your evil heart. There are more than 100,000 savages, 400 to 500 giants. But the Night Watchers lost all their elites at Fist Peak, leaving only a few hundred old and weak. You believed that Manslade would eventually cross the wall and kill us all, so you sought refuge with the savages. The evidence is conclusive. Jon Snow, plead guilty. I'm not guilty. Jon met Ser Alistair's gaze coldly. His Majesty has captured so many savages. You can ask around and see if they know that I'm a spy for the savages in Dark Castle. Bring in the prisoners. Soon, a dozen savage leaders were brought into the hall. Among them was Yegaret the Fire Kiss. What, John, you didn't betray me. You're our spy. Who gave you this mission? Ah, you should have told me earlier. I shouldn't have shot you with an arrow. Hearing Ser Alicer's question, Yegaret's eyes widened in surprise and a little resentment. Was this guy really stupid, or was he high enough to defend his lover? Ser Alicer's face darkened as he continued to ask the next savage. But they either didn't know, or they were spouting nonsense. Their words were contradictory and illogical. Oh, I see. Ser Alicer's face suddenly brightened. Who would have thought, Jon Snow, he said, that you hold such a high place in Mansred's heart? To protect you, he hid your identity as a spy from almost all the wildlings. Dany laughed inwardly at his imagination. Jon's face contorted, his eyes almost spitting fire. Don't glare at me. I completely understand Manslade's thoughts. He's not a simple savage. He knows how useful Stark can be in conquering the North. It's normal for him to protect you, Ser Alicer said with a smug and vicious smile. Well, now that the truth is out, Jon Snow, what do you have to say? Slynt concluded. Manslade doesn't care that I'm Stark's illegitimate son. He wants to invade the North by force. The savages all know, Jon shouted, craning his neck. Slynt said, sophistry. Do you think we have turnips on our necks? That we'll be deceived by your lies? Men, hang Chameleon Jon immediately. Wait, Count Slynt, Scholar Ymont said respectfully, but his expression was ugly. You can judge Jon, but before you carry out the sentence, please ask His Majesty's opinion on the outcome of the case. Everyone in the hall looked at Dany. Is Count Slynt the commander-in-chief? Dany asked. No. Since he's not the commander-in-chief, how can he be Jon Snow's chief judge? Scholar Ymont frowned and said with some difficulty, Count Slynt has the highest rank. But I remember putting on the black robes and abandoning my previous identity. This. The old man wanted to say that this was an unspoken rule, but there were so many night watchers in the room. Wouldn't they be disappointed if he said that? The old man sighed and asked helplessly, what do you think should be done, Your Majesty? Since the commander-in-chief is voted for by all the night watchers, Jon Snow's final trial should also be decided by all the night watchers before the official commander-in-chief is born. She wanted to ask if she had entertained this Sir Elisa, but it was not convenient for her to say such frivolous words. Chapter 296. Knight, how many gold royals do we still have? Dany looked at the old knight. More than 30. Leave it all to Maxi. Winter is coming, and the days are getting harder. From today onwards, all night watchers can receive a silver deer every month until next summer. If we run out of money, I'll send a few more sacks over next time. 1 gold royal could be exchanged for 210 silver deer. More than 30 gold royals were almost a year's salary for all the night watchers. A few sacks, Your Majesty, you're not talking nonsense, are you? Toad could not help but shout. A silver coin. Oh my God, I've never seen a silver deer before. A small night watcher said excitedly. A silver deer a month, 12 a year. 7 gods above, the Tennessee Knights at the entrance of the village only have about 200 acres of land, and they don't even have such a high income. An old night watchman with missing front teeth counted with his fingers. Isn't that a bit too much? Scholar Ymont frowned. What's so much? If it weren't for the lack of resources here and the fact that we have too much money to spend, I would have given everyone a gold royal, Dany said generously. Gulp. Old Aemon swallowed his saliva with difficulty and almost fainted. A gold dragon. Gasps could be heard in the hall. Dany smiled faintly and said to everyone, don't doubt me. You can send messenger crows to the 7 kingdoms and tell all the Westeros that as long as they wear black clothes and survive the winter, when spring comes, I will give each night watcher 50 gold royals. It's equivalent to 4 years of winter, 1 gold royal every month. How much would that be? Yamant said in a daze. Your Majesty, you're not joking. Red Pomegranate asked in disbelief. Targaryen, your words are like a mountain. Thump, thump. 7 or 8 black-clothed men's faces turned red as blood rushed to their heads. They were so excited that they fainted. Your Majesty, I'm afraid that once this news spreads, countless civilians who can't survive will come to the Great Wall to join the Night Watchers. If you can't fulfill your promise. The old scholar reminded her worriedly. Ha ha ha, not to mention 10,000, even if 100,000 people came, it would only cost 5 million gold royals. Dany raised her head and laughed. Only 5 million gold royals? Elisa and Slint stuttered and looked at each other. Perez Tan, Dany called out to the red-nosed old man who was standing at the side with a look of disdain on his face, tell everyone if I can fulfill my promise. The old man glanced at everyone in the hall as if he were looking at a country bumpkin. He raised his chin slightly and said, if Her Majesty hasn't been defeated by the Alliance after winter, she can even raise 1 million Night Watchers, let alone 100,000. If the Alliance army is defeated by her, it wouldn't be a problem for the grown men of the 7 nations to come and defend the Great Wall. She's already the world's overlord, the greatest empress under the heavens. She has so much gold that she can build another Great Wall of gold. Thump, thump, thump. The Night Watchers in the hall felt their legs go weak. Even Jon Snow was on the verge of collapsing. He was trembling under a certain someone's heroic spirit. Dany wasn't just trying to show off. Well, she was definitely trying to show off. She wouldn't know if she didn't come to the Great Wall. There were too few Night Watchers. If she had 10,000 Night Watchers now, the 19 castles would all be filled. First of all, the barbarians would no longer be a threat. Well, with her around, Dany wasn't worried about the barbarians taking down the Great Wall. But a few hundred Night Watchers couldn't take down 100,000 barbarian captives. Secondly, as long as she didn't ride her dragon and wander around outside the Great Wall, it would be difficult for the Night King to cross the Great Wall if there were enough Night Watchers. Compared to the fate of the entire world, even if she didn't have any feelings for the Westeros, a few million gold royals was worth it. It was at least 10,000 times better than Robert spending it on wine and women. Congratulations to Her Majesty. Long live the Queen. Long live the true dragon. Long live the Megalosaurus. This time, the hall was almost full. Hundreds of Night Watchers raised their cups and toasted to Queen Dany. Their shouts shook the sky and their emotions surged. Well, everyone knew about the winter benefits the Queen had given them. 50 gold royals. How could they not wish her well? After 3 rounds of wine and 5 dishes, Dany, who was sitting at the head of the table, cleared her throat and said to the Night Watchers on both sides, Commander Mormont has been dead for more than half a year. A new commander hasn't been chosen yet. What do you think? We'll be negotiating with the barbarians tomorrow. Let's not talk about whether we can succeed. You should at least send a representative, right? Your Majesty, we can't let the barbarians cross the Great Wall. Sir Alliser said hurriedly. It's true that the barbarians put down their weapons and surrender unconditionally. It's good for both sides. However, there are only 600 to 700 Night Watchers on the Great Wall. It's impossible to control so many people outside the city. The veteran commander of the Shadow Tower, Sir Dennis Mallister, also expressed his opposition. The gray-haired knight had been the commander of the Shadow Tower for 33 years. He was the uncle of the Earl of Sealand and had a high status. Dany had to take his opinion seriously. There are only 3 ways out for the hundreds of thousands of savages outside the city. 1. They can break through the Great Wall and destroy the northern region. 2. With my 2 dragons and the 600 or so Night Watchers, you can keep the savages outside the city. When winter comes, 99% of the savages will freeze and starve to death. 3. We can negotiate and decide on a plan that both sides can accept to minimize casualties. Sir Mallister, do you have a fourth plan? No, but... The gray-haired knight's expression was cold and resolute. He gritted his teeth and said, "People will die in winter. Countless civilians of the Seven Kingdoms will freeze and starve to death. The North has experienced turmoil and is still in turmoil. Their situation is not much better than the barbarians outside the Great Wall. However, there is limited food. Even if we capture all the barbarians, there will be no food to save them. How do we deal with the deviant ghosts?" John couldn't help but ask. Deviant ghosts. The old knight's cold expression cracked. He shook his head helplessly and said, "I don't know." "I know what you're trying to say." One barbarian fell, and a corpse ghost stood up, but... I really don't know how to solve this problem. Are there really deviant ghosts? Perestan, who was sitting opposite John, frowned. He originally believed that deviant ghosts were just a gimmick used by the Night Watchers to get sponsorship. However, after coming to the Great Wall, almost all the Night Watchers took deviant ghosts for granted. This made his belief waver. "Your Majesty, you walked around the Great Wall this morning. Did you find any deviant ghosts?" The old man asked. "No, I didn't even see any living dead. They seem to be hiding from the sun. When we negotiate with the King of Savages tomorrow, we can ask them." Dany shook her head and said, "Sigh, Slaver's Bay is too far away from here. Otherwise, food wouldn't be a problem at all." Barristan sighed. "Well, that reminds me, sir." An idea flashed through Dany's mind, and she couldn't help but smile. "How about this? Let's choose a barbarian with a family to guard the Great Wall, and his family will follow me across the narrow sea. With his family as hostages, the barbarians will have to listen to the Night Watchers no matter how rebellious they are. Their family can go to the plains of the Rhone River to farm." Such a bold plan made the Night Watchers who were listening in on their conversation confused. "Your Majesty, I don't quite understand. How are the barbarians going to the Urso continent? There are more than 100,000 of them. How many ships would they need? Besides, why are the free trade city-states willing to accept them?" Ymont came back to his senses and asked curiously. "Old man, wherever the true dragon sees, it's the king's land." Dany's lips curled into a cold smile. "What does it matter if they're willing or not? Let's not talk about the barbarians. With just a few hundred giants and my megalosaurus, who in the world can stop me? Use the barbarians to conquer the free city-states?" John frowned. "Attacking another country for no reason," he said unhappily. "Attacking another country for no reason, okay. And how many people will die? Kid, you've got one thing wrong. The free trade city-states have already declared war on Her Majesty." The red-nosed old man shook his head and looked at Dany with a complicated expression. "Her Majesty's magnanimity, vision, and wisdom are admirable. She came up with a plan to solve the barbarians, the deviant ghosts, and the allies at the same time. There's no doubt that this plan is a win-win for Her Majesty, the barbarians, and the Westeros. Maybe before winter, Her Majesty will be crowned as the first empress in the world." Silence fell in the hall. Several senior members of the Night Watchers frowned and pondered. Even the Night Watchers who were drinking and talking dirty became quiet in the strange atmosphere. "The impact of this matter is too great. I can't bear the responsibility and consequences. Only the Commander-in-Chief can give you the final answer," Bowen Maxey said with a bitter face. "Then let's choose the Commander-in-Chief." Dany looked around and asked curiously, "Who are the candidates?" "All the brothers of the Night Watchers are qualified to be the Commander-in-Chief and have the right to vote." As soon as Ymont finished speaking, the short man with two chins, Slint, stood up and said loudly, "I used to be the Commander-in-Chief of the garrison of the capital, the commander of 3,000 golden robes, and the Count of Hellenberg. Count, your fief has changed." The red-nosed old doctor reminded him. "Now, Hellenberg belongs to Duke Peter Belize." Slint's chin trembled and he forced a smile. "It's good that it's changed. Everyone knows that Helenburg is cursed. Blackheart Hall was burned to death in the city by Balerion on the day Helenburg was built. Then, the Keholis family was wiped out by Redheart Helenburg. The third castellan, Haraway, was slaughtered by cruel Meg. No one could refute it. Dany did not even glance at Slynt and Elisa. She only stared at the Shadow Tower commander, who was deep in thought, and said, "Obviously, Slynt and Elisa are unable to do this. They belong to Lannister, and Lannister sits on the Iron Throne. As long as the other ghosts are proven to be real, the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms will no longer ignore the Wall. At that time, various forces will come. Not to mention how a selfish commander will convince the masses. What if the Night Watchmen side with Lannister? As Lannister's enemy, how will Targaryen deal with you? Why don't you say it out loud? I will lead by example." Dany raised her right hand. Her expression was solemn, and her voice was loud and clear. "I swear in the name of the Targaryen ancestors. I swear in the name of the Mother of Dragons. No matter how much I invest in the Night Watchmen only belong to the Wall. I will never ask the Night Watchmen to serve my personal interests." "Good." Bowen Marcy, Blacksmith Tanner, Mal Lister, and the other higher-ups of the Night Watchmen cheered loudly. The Night Watchman brothers in the hall clapped excitedly. Even Jon looked at Dany with admiration and worship. This woman. Professor Perez-Tan had a complicated look in his eyes. His emotions were in a mess. If the other ghosts were real, if the other ghosts were as powerful as the legend said, if the other ghosts really had the intention of crossing the Wall, then the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms would end their disputes and head north together to resist the enemy. However, the War of the Usurpers and the rebellion of the Four Princes had caused the blood feud between the nobles to be as deep as the ocean. Would they be able to trust each other and deal with the common enemy peacefully? Dragon Queen's vow at this moment was undoubtedly a good start. The forces of the Seven Kingdoms would unite under the neutral Night Watchmen without any selfish motives. They would only serve the Westeros. Thinking about it this way, Dragon Queen's decision to exclude Elisa and Slynt as candidates for Commander-in-Chief was not only correct, it was also very wise and decisive. The Night Watchmen had to be neutral. Otherwise, the plan of the Seven Kingdoms to resist the other Ghost Alliance would never be realized. Unconsciously, the red-nosed old man also began to clap. He was filled with emotions. Apart from the conflict of ideas between the true world and the magic civilization, the Dragon Queen's talent, magnanimity, and wisdom were far beyond the players of the Seven Kingdoms. They were not even on the same level. She was truly a wise ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. "Your Majesty, I think you misunderstood me." After the cheering stopped, Sir Elisa's thin and stern face turned red. He stuttered, "I admit that I dislike Jon and Stark, but it's not to curry favor with Lannister. I'm different from Count Slynt. I'm not a confidant of Cersei and Tywin. If justice is lost, the hearts of the people will easily scatter, and honor will naturally disappear. It is already hard to endure beyond the Great Wall. Without unity and honor, how can the Night Watchers fight?" Dany shook her head. Jon was stunned, and asked hesitantly, "Your Majesty, when winter is over and summer comes, after you take back the Iron Throne, what do you plan to do with Winterfell Stark?" Winterfell now belongs to Rhaenys Snow, right?" Dany smiled meaningfully. "The people of the Northern Territory will not forget Stark," Jon said with certainty. Screech, walking up the stone steps, Whitey, who was lying at the door, stretched its neck and called out to Dany. Dany patted its chin and asked, "Where have you been? I haven't seen you all day." "Winter is coming, and the beasts in the forest have all hidden. It's not easy to find them." Scholar Ymonth lifted the oil lamp and looked at the charred corpse of the beast in front of Whitey. "It has a long horn, could it be a deer? But it's so tall and strong, more like a wild horse. Strange, I don't recognize it." "Ah, a unicorn!" the old man suddenly exclaimed. "I remember now, this is a unicorn. 7 gods above, the white dragon killed a unicorn. Chapter 298. Unicorn. Danny and John exclaimed at the same time. Even Baristan, who had opened the door of the king's tower, turned around in surprise and asked, "Scholar Yamant, are you sure there are unicorns beyond the Great Wall?" "But I don't see any unicorns in Mansrid's army." "No, Whitey didn't go beyond the Great Wall. I warned them not to hunt beyond the Great Wall." Danny shook her head. She walked to the beast's body and examined it carefully. 99% of its fur was burnt, and there were a few tufts of long silver hair on its hooves. The most striking feature was the long black horn that Whitey had thrown aside. It was 1.2 meters long and as thick as the rim of a cup. There were deep spiral grooves on it, like a drill. "I've never seen a unicorn in the north," John said. Yamant thought for a moment and said, "There's a huge island called Skaggs Island in Seal Bay to the east of the East Sea. It's said that there are unicorns on it." "Skaggs Island? I heard that it's full of uncivilized savages, but they're still Stark's vassals in name," John said thoughtfully. Holding the unicorn's horn in her hand, Danny stepped into the tower, took off her cloak, and hung it on the wall. She said while drying the flesh and blood on the horn by the fireplace, "John, let me first say that I'm actually quite happy to see Stark's family destroyed. Don't get too excited, I have a reason to be happy. Anyone who isn't happy to see their enemy in trouble must be crazy. I don't think you've forgotten the War of the Usurpers 16 years ago, have you?" John's cheek muscles twitched. He pursed his lips and said, "Who does His Majesty plan to take revenge on? Now only my 2 sisters and I are left alive." "I met your aunt in Hajin," Danny said with a smile. "Aunt? What auntie?" John asked, confused. "Lady Caitlin Tully," said Baristan. "Impossible!" John screamed. "Lady Caitlin died at the Red Wedding. It has been confirmed." Old Yamant frowned. Baristan looked at the blazing flames in the fireplace and said with a worried expression, "She did die at that time, but the Red God priest from Mir can revive the dead." Even though Lady Caitlin had been dead for 3 days and her corpse was covered in maggots, she was still saved by Earl Barry. Yes, Count Bailey had been resurrected by Murtheros multiple times and had become a believer of the Light King, Lalo. But there are too many side effects of reviving the dead. The once sweet and kind Lady Caitlin seems to have turned into a different person. The meaning of the guest's rites has completely changed. Then, the old knight told him the story of the Crossroads Inn in detail. "This." Scholar Yamant rubbed his face and murmured, "The dead can be resurrected multiple times, and the guest's rites have become the guest's death banquet. What is wrong with this world? Even deviant ghosts have appeared. Old master, you should get over it." Danny comforted him. Glancing at John, who was frowning in deep thought, she continued the previous topic and said, "Do you understand now? I didn't even kill Caitlin. Naturally, I won't do anything to your father's children because of what he did to my father." "You're not going to avenge your father and brother?" John asked in disbelief. "There are some enemies that I will definitely not let go of, but my revenge will be righteous and justified. Before fighting for the Iron Throne, I will first convene a great council and conduct a great trial on the major events that have happened in the past 20 years, including the matter of my father burning your uncle and grandfather to death, and the matter of Rhaegar abducting your aunt. Even at the Red Wedding, I will help your brother Robb uphold justice. Frere and Bolton, I will not let any of the guilty ones go." "Why?" John looked confused. "Because," Danny's lips curled up, and her fair face revealed an expression of extreme confidence and pride, "a dirty Westeros is not worthy of being conquered by me." John's eyes bulged, and his face was filled with disbelief. He never thought that there would be such a... He did not know if he should call it arrogant, because arrogant was a derogatory term, but he sincerely hoped that all monarchs could be as arrogant as her. Baristan nodded his head in relief. "This is the wise lord that I have been searching for." Old Master Yamant's blue eyes narrowed, and his lips trembled. "Danny, if you can do what you say, you will be greater than our ancestor Aegon. Dany rolled her eyes. I have long surpassed Aegon. Aegon was only a conqueror of Westeros. Not only am I a conqueror, I am also the liberator of slaves, the mother of dragons, the source of magic, and the successor of the Great Wizard. Putting everything else aside, just based on the fact that I have inherited the legacy of the Great Wizard of Valeglia, all the Targaryen dragon kings have to bow to me, just like how they bowed to the Great Wizard back then. The legacy of the Great Wizard? Ymont frowned as he pondered. Old Master, do you know of the 14 Fire Peak families? I do. Valeglia has 14 large active volcanoes, and each of them is under the control of a top family. Ymont nodded. Do you know of Donna and Dreamwalker Dany? Of course I do. The first ancestor of the Targaryen family on Dragonstone Island. Then do you know of Donna Targaryen's position in Valeglia? You can use the Westeros aristocracy as an analogy. The old man said hesitantly, the 14 Fire Peaks are equivalent to the 7 Great Dukes. Our ancestor's position in Valeglia was not high. He was probably at the level of a knight, and Valerian and Sitiga were the knights of our family. That's right. Then do you know of the Great Wizard's position in Valeglia? What position? Ymont asked curiously. The King of the 7 Kingdoms. His legacy is equivalent to the Iron Throne. Now, a small family of a fallen knight has seized the Iron Throne. Tell me, how is this achievement compared to Aegon's? Dany said with a faint smile. That exaggerated? The old scholar opened his mouth wide, his face full of disbelief. It's not exaggerated at all. In the magical civilization of Valeglia, magic power is equivalent to status. Ymont nodded and asked again, what can the legacy of the Great Wizard do? What can it do? Dany thought for a moment and sighed, give me 20 years, and I can probably bring the destroyed Valeglia back to life in this world. But what's the point? Valeglia's civilization has reached a dead end. This is too scary. Jon was shocked at first, then overjoyed. He asked excitedly, I learned a meditation spell in the glass candle last night. Is it the legacy of the Great Wizard? Looking at the flickering shadows in Jon's gray eyes, Dany held back her laughter and shook her head. Jon, you're really talented. It's only been a day, and you haven't even learned the basic runes, but you've already successfully built the meditation rune. However, you do not have the Targaryen blood, so you cannot learn my spells. Congratulations, you have become a shadow-binding knight. Plop. Barristan and old Ymont, who understood the meaning of shadow-binding knight, were so shocked that they almost fell off their chairs. What is a shadow-binding knight? Jon asked blankly. It's the same as shape-shifting. It's a misunderstood profession. Your Majesty, how can you let Jon learn the Shadow Child witchcraft? Old Ymont stomped his walking stick and complained. For some reason, he always had a strange fondness for this long-faced, black-haired young man and took care of him as if he was his nephew. Now that he heard that Dany had lured him into the Shadow Child witchcraft, he was very angry. It's just a meditation technique. I don't know blood witchcraft, shadow secret spell, or demon sacrifice witchcraft. What? Jon was dumbfounded. Blood witchcraft, shadow secret spell, demon sacrifice witchcraft. It sounded evil. What had he become? Think about it. What's the difference between a spirit wolf and a shadow-binding knight in the eyes of Westeros? There is no difference, but it's too scary to be both a spirit wolf and a shadow-binding knight at the same time. Barristan frowned. Sir, there's something wrong with your words. It's both murder. Is it lighter to kill someone with a machete than to kill someone with a machete in his left hand and a sword in his right hand? As long as Jon sticks to his conscience, he's still a good person even if he learns a few necromancy spells. If Jon loses his humanity and doesn't learn any witchcraft, he can still do evil with a sword. Who do you think is more evil? Tam, Queenie, or Waldfred? White Knight was silent for a long time and sighed. That's true, but the common people's opinion, Jon is just a night watcher, not a king. Does the common people's opinion matter? Old Knight was speechless. Then, Danny said to John, who was at a loss, "Don't blame me. I only know 2 types of meditation spells. You can't learn the Great Wizard's legacy. The incomplete Fire Wizard's meditation spell is not as good as the complete Shadow Binding Knight with great potential." As she spoke, she went back to her bedroom and brought back a book and a metal plate. She handed them to John and said, "There's a Fire Wizard spell in the metal plate. Shadow Binding Knights control the power of fire, blood, and shadows. You can learn it too. There's also Tam's diary, the notes left behind by a legendary half-god wizard. You can learn it, but you must remember, hold the sword in your hand, and sit with benevolence in your heart. Do it with caution." John squeezed the black, cold metal plate and said in shock, "Valeglia's steel? Oh, you're quite knowledgeable." Danny raised her eyebrows and nodded. "It's the real Valeglia's secret spell. I learned the Fire Wizard spell from it." "Thank you," John said sincerely. He felt that the Queen was right. There was no evil or righteous power. As long as it was in the hands of a kind person, it should be used carefully. Danny suddenly thought of something and asked, "Since you've learned the meditation spell, have you found the dire wolf?" After hesitating for a moment, John nodded and said, "I found it. Last night, I was able to enter and exit Whitey's body freely. It should be near the Savage camp. When the city gates open for the negotiations tomorrow, it will be able to return home." "Right, I also found Manslade's tent. Should I? No, since I've already agreed to negotiate with him, I can't go back on my word and kill him with a mouthful of dragon flame in the middle of the night." Danny refused. "Your Majesty, I studied magic when I was young. Can I learn the legacy of the Great Wizard?" Yimont suddenly asked.
Ulma is old but strong, and his swordsmanship is getting better and better. Baristan was also shocked. Just when everyone thought that Danny would definitely be hit, she let out a clear cry. Her waist was as flexible as a willow branch as she bent backwards, and the iron boots on her feet kicked the old man's right hand that was swinging down. Bang plop chi. The sword was kicked more than 10 meters high, and when it finally fell, it stabbed into the mud. Before the sword hit the ground, Danny fell into the mud, splashing mud everywhere. But she didn't cry out, nor did she stop moving. She was like a nimble little pig. Under everyone's dumbfounded gaze, she quickly rolled half a circle in the mud, as if she was dodging a sharp arrow that was shot at her. When she changed from lying on the ground to crawling on the ground, she suddenly pounced forward and pushed the old man, who was holding his hand and staring blankly at her, to the ground. With a crack, the old man's right arm was dislocated under the weight of several tens of kilograms of iron armor. "Ow!" the old man howled in pain. Danny's iron gloves that were covered in wet mud still held the hilt of the sword firmly. The blade of the sword was pressed against the old man's neck. She exhaled clouds of white smoke and asked in a rough voice, "Do you surrender?" "Chi." The sword that was flying in the air finally fell. "Surrender, I surrender." The old man shouted. How is this a training ground?" The one-armed blacksmith murmured in shock, She must have participated in many battles." "No, she is only 16 years old, it is impossible for her to have experienced hundreds of battles. This is talent, a perfect talent for fighting on the battlefield, exactly the same as Robert. What's going on? Why is Her Majesty fighting so hard?" Todd looked around and asked in confusion. "That is her conditioned reaction. The Shadow Tower's commander, Sir Mal Lister, said with a serious expression." Red Pomegranate Marcy nodded and said, "After she fell to the ground, Ulma should have pounced or used his left hand to throw a dagger at her. Although Ulma didn't do anything, she immediately turned around and dodged. What a terrifying battle talent." Baristan said proudly, "Her Majesty almost never held a sword before the age of 15, but her talent is very good. Under my training for more than a year, she has achieved achievements that many knights would never be able to achieve in their lifetime. What, only a year of training? Sir Mallister said in disbelief, this doesn't make sense. All of us started training from the age of 5. Even the extremely talented Prince Riga started practicing martial arts at the age of 12 and only achieved some success after 4 years of training. Baristan smiled bitterly and asked, in the past 14 years, she didn't even have enough to eat and wandered around with Prince Viserys. Who taught her martial arts? Everyone fell silent with a complicated expression. She has strength, speed, and skills.
In a few years, Her Majesty might be able to achieve something in the tournament. Yes, she will participate as a mysterious knight. Scholar Yamant said with relief. Perestan glanced at him with a wooden face and said strangely, in a few years, Her Majesty will become the first female knight to win the tournament in the history of Westeros. 7 gods above. Red Pomegranate Marcy said in shock, when did this happen? The red-nosed old man said, a few days ago, in the old town. In order to recruit free riders to deal with the pirate attacks, the Hyder and Tyrell families jointly organized a Honeywine River tournament. Her Majesty changed her name to Layla Vesuvius and Sir Baristan as her knight attendant. When the two of them came to the old town, they happened to encounter this matter and she signed up as a mysterious knight. Layla Vesuvius. Yamant said thoughtfully, her mother's name is Layla, and Vesuvius is the surname of the king's illegitimate son. Did anyone recognize her identity? Master Tanner asked curiously, she looks very similar to Queen Layla and Madame Lele. Even I can see that something is wrong. She dyed her hair black, her eyebrows and temperament changed. The old professor shook his head. She defeated Valiant Garan, Laughing Baylor, and Horned Hill Deacon consecutively. She won the Crown of Love and Beauty, and took off her helmet on the spot to put on a golden rose crown. Hee, there were thousands of people here, including me. I have never been so shocked in my life, but no one doubted her identity. The Crown of Love and Beauty. Gosh, what a legendary experience. I reckon the people of the old town will never forget such a scene. Scholar Yamant was fascinated. He could not wait to see the scene of the Targaryen descendants in the Glory Martial Arena with his own eyes. Isn't that so? When the news spreads, everyone will know the true identity of Layla, who put on a crown for herself. Every day, there will be poets reciting her deeds in taverns all over the world, the red-nosed old man said bitterly. John listened with envy and admiration. He grew up listening to old Nan's stories. Fool, Florian and Cheongchi, Nymeria, Clever Rand, City Builder, Brandon, Star-Eyed Simeon, Bard Bell. There was no doubt that soon, Queen Dany Rise, who fought for her crown for herself, would also become one of those legendary heroes. This was the dream that he, Robb, Bran, and even Theon the Chameleon, the 4 brothers shared when they listened to the stories. Legendary heroes were too far away, but he did have the intention to make a name for himself in the tournament. He even fantasized that after he won the Crown of Love and Beauty, he would give it to his little sister. Little sister was Jon's exclusive name for Arya. Maybe his father would think better of him, maybe Catelyn. Auntie would not be so sarcastic to him. She would often mock him until he ran away from the crowd with tears in his eyes, but the dream became a dream. He became a night watcher and no longer had the right to participate in the tournament. As for Robb, Theon, Bran and the rest, Peristan. The queen's voice came from afar. I'm here. The red-nosed old man on the stone steps craned his neck and asked curiously, what's the matter, Your Majesty? Why are you so blind? Come down and treat this old man's injuries. Ah. Oh, I'm coming. The old man was stunned. Only then did he remember that he had become a night watcher. Old man, your swordsmanship is very strong. If it weren't for your old age and slow movements, I wouldn't be your opponent. Dany wiped the mud off her body as she spoke to the hunchbacked old man who was groaning on the ground. Ulma is actually better at archery. Baristan walked over with a half-filled wooden bucket and helped Danny clean the mud on her armor. I didn't expect a white raven like you to still remember me. The sky was blue, the snow was white, the sun was warm, and the breeze was gentle. Glenn, who was leaning against the battlements on the city wall, pulled his collar and found that his clothes were wet with sweat. He panted nervously and complained to Eddie beside him, "The savages are too cunning. There are only 5 of us, and there are 16 of them. Yeah, if we really fight, we'll be at a disadvantage." Eddie swallowed and stared at the group of savages with his eyes wide open, as if trying to distinguish the expressions of each of the savages. However, until both sides sat down on the wooden chairs in the middle of the snow, no one pulled out their swords. Danny took off her helmet. The warm wind blew, lifting the fine bangs on her forehead. "I'm Daenerys Targaryen." The leader of the group of savages pulled down his hood. It was an ordinary-looking, gray-haired, middle-aged man. It was obvious that he liked to smile, and there were very obvious smile lines at the corner of his mouth. Seeing the beautiful queen who seemed to be shining in the sun, his eyes flashed with undisguised surprise, and his smile lines unconsciously formed. "You're so beautiful, your majesty." Sir Mallister frowned and said, "Man's Red, you're too cowardly to bring so many people here. Why didn't you bring the giants too?" Man's Red looked around and shrugged. "These commanders each lead a large tribe, and their status is similar to mine. If Giant Marg hadn't been captured by you, I would have brought him here too." Danny sat down on her own chair. Baristan stood behind her, armed to the teeth, and Man's Red sat opposite her. There were not enough chairs, and a few of the savages began to quarrel. In the end, in order to snatch the wooden chairs, the 2 bearded men even hugged each other and wrestled. Danny and the others were stunned. "Now I believe you, their status is similar to yours." Danny's mouth twitched. She glanced at the gloomy king of savages and said strangely, "I thought you were the king of beyond the Great Wall, and your words carried weight." She really didn't plan to play the game of 2 peaches against 3 men. The Night Watchers had prepared 12 chairs, and the Night Watchers had only taken 4. The remaining 8 chairs should have been enough for the savages. She didn't expect so many of them to come. "Those without chairs, stand behind me," Man's Red growled. The savages also felt a little embarrassed. A few of the commanders who had snatched chairs reprimanded them loudly, and those without chairs glared at their companions with red faces. They also felt embarrassed to say that the Night Watchers were unfair for bringing out too few chairs. After all, only 5 of them came, and took up 4 chairs. While the remaining 8 were hesitating, a red-haired, red-bearded savage threw his oak shield into the snow and sat on it. He shouted, "Man's Red, I, Tormund, the Giant's Bane, am not your guard. I can't stand behind you." "Fine, fine, fine." If he had not reacted quickly, he and Jurgrit would have died in that accident. "I know," Man's Red nodded and said with a heavy expression, "thousands of old and weak have died all the way from the Windy Gorge to the Great Wall. If we let them climb the Great Wall, maybe half of them will die." After crossing the Great Wall, being chased by the Night Watchers, the Megalosaurus, and the people of the northern region, more than half of those who survive will die, but there is always hope for us free people. There will always be many people who can survive. But if we stay north of the Great Wall, when the real winter comes, we will all die. "Deviant ghosts?" Danny asked. A savage wearing a snow bear's fur cursed loudly, "Those bastards have been following us. Every morning when we wake up, we will find a batch of empty tents. The people inside have been captured by the deviant ghosts. Not only the white ghosts, but also the cold and food. We have to cross the Great Wall. Even if you have 100 dragons, you can't change this," Man's Red with a firm expression. "The savages have always wanted to go to the other side of the Great Wall, but do you know what's there?" Danny sighed. The barefoot commander stared greedily at Danny and said loudly, "There are women, food, clothes, a big house for the winter, everything we need." Sir Mallister gripped the wooden chair's armrest tightly and leaned his upper body forward like a furious lion about to pounce and bite someone. He roared, "No, there are swords, spears, armored knights in the northern region, and even women with bows and arrows. The strangers are waiting for you there." The subterranean dweller with blue paint on his face spat on the ground and mocked loudly, "You think we're afraid of you kneeling people? Ha ha ha, my grandmother is an old woman with a spear. She can easily kill 3 people who kneel." The savages beyond the Great Wall were actually the ancestors who crossed the sea from Urso 10,000 years ago. Other than the fact that their ancestors were purer and were not affected by the Andalans, they were essentially no different from the people of the northern region. The savages called themselves free people, while the people south of the Great Wall were degraded as kneelers. Yes, because the people of the 7 kingdoms had to kneel to their lords and kings. Danny glanced at the cavemen casually and said to the king of savages, "Mansless, you are different from the other savages. At least you know the influence of the political situation of the 7 kingdoms on your invasion. Unfortunately, the situation in the Westeros has changed in the past few years, and your information is a little outdated." She said softly, "Since it's a negotiation, of course you can propose any conditions on the spot. Just like when you said that you wanted to kill all the Night Watchers, climb over the Great Wall, set fire to the northern region, eat people, and steal women, I didn't pull out my knife to kill anyone, did I? There's no room for negotiation. Free people will not kneel and surrender to any lord or king." The king of barbarians emphasized solemnly. Danny sneered. "Stop lying to yourself. No society can have no classes. The 16 of you are equivalent to the lords of the barbarians. You represent a privileged class. The people under your command live a life even more miserable than the lowliest peasants in the 7 kingdoms. What freedom do you have?" Mance shook his head slowly and said solemnly, "You don't know anything. We are not bound by the country, nobles, kings, or laws. We only choose and follow a certain leader based on our own preferences. You are really a bunch of pitiful creatures. You have been deceived by an illusory lie for thousands of years." Danny sighed. "Woman, tell us clearly. Who has deceived us?" Tormund was furious. Danny said slowly, "With the barren land beyond the Great Wall and the level of civilization of you barbarians, you don't even have enough food and clothing. You don't have the right to pursue freedom. An ordinary barbarian, from birth to death, spends most of his life working hard for a meal. However, no matter how hardworking and intelligent a barbarian is, it is impossible for him to survive the winter with his own strength. This does not depend on whether he can accumulate enough food to survive the winter. You have no laws, no restrictions, and are used to bullying the weak. The strong rob the weak of their daily necessities to survive. He is powerless to stop other barbarians from robbing him. At that time, he will only have 2 choices. The first is to die freely. After working hard for a few years to prepare food for his family, he will starve to death and his wife will be taken by someone else. The second is to freely choose who to be enslaved by. He will not be able to protect his property alone. He can only rely on the power of an organization. He can rely on an overlord. However, this will form the most primitive bureaucratic system. It goes against your idea of complete freedom. It is not as advanced as the Westeros feudal system. May I ask, what kind of freedom is the above 2 situations? You just have no morals and etiquette. It is the naked law of the jungle, the survival of the fittest. What is there to be proud of when you live a life no different from a wild beast? In other words, the wild boars and wolves in the forest are also free, but whoever envies them is a fool." After listening to Danny's words, Jon suddenly felt enlightened. He had not forgotten Ygritte's preaching to him about knowing nothing. Learn from you. Danny nodded. "Remember I mentioned before that in the war between civilizations and races, the weak are eliminated and the strong survive. If you learn from my social system and develop your spirit and culture, it means that your law of survival in the barbarian society will be eliminated, right? Yes, Manslade said dejectedly. Those who are eliminated are the weak. Your current social system is not up to standard. From technology to culture, your civilization has lost to us in all aspects, Danny declared. Manslade was speechless. He lowered his head deeply. Even the most active Tormund looked depressed, as if he had suddenly lost his soul. Some of the other barbarians were confused, while some understood a little. But whether they understood or not, everyone understood one thing: Manslade, the king of the Beyond the Great Wall, had lost to the silver-haired queen. Unlike Jon and Barristan, who were beaming with joy, Dany's expression was indifferent. She continued, "The battle between us is not over yet. Manslade, if you can recognize reality and learn from my strengths, at least you can maintain a stalemate. In this verbal war between civilizations and races, you have not lost. Let's continue." "Yes," the king of the Beyond the Great Wall said in a hoarse voice. He knew that he had already lost. Even if he could look at the problem rationally and learn humbly, the imitators would at least be one step slower. He had been slower in technology and culture for several times in a row. The quantitative change had caused a qualitative change, leading to an irreversible collapse. The more desire a person has, the more motivation they will have, and the chasm of desire will never be filled. With honor, they will ask for more things, such as wealth. Our soldiers have the same weapons and fighting spirit, but in addition to honor, if I promise them money, will they be braver and more proactive? Yes. After that, you also learned how to reward the soldiers, and even increase the amount. After I learned of your actions, I also increased the reward. In this way, the treatment of the soldiers became better and better, and the benefits of our two kings were gradually divided by them, becoming less and less. What would happen in the end? This. Manslade was stunned. His expression changed drastically, and he said in shock, "The soldiers and the king will be divided equally according to how much effort they put in, and even the land, wealth, and ruling rights of the entire country. This is the limit. If the king pays more benefits, he will lose money, so he might as well be a soldier." What is going on? Jon and Barristan were also shocked. "As you think," Dany looked around and said with a faint smile, "that is the future of civilization, and the ideal social system. Fairness, justice, everyone is the master of the country, and the interests of the country are closely related to everyone. The king is no longer a wolf, and the people are no longer sheep. They are all the same species, wolves. There is a difference in strength between a strong wolf and a weak one, but it is much better than the despair of a sheep facing a wolf." "Why is this?" Jon was confused. "As I said, the law of survival of the fittest is actually beneficial to the development of civilization." Dany leaned back in her chair and looked at the king of Beyond the Great Wall, who was hit hard, and said lazily, "Okay, after saying so much, you should have made a choice, right? Or you can recognize the reality and change from this moment on, or you can be completely eliminated in this race competition." Mansred nodded. His expression was complicated. There was sincere admiration and gratitude, but also a deep sense of helplessness. After a while, he said, "Dany, rise, you are the first king to convince me, and also the most special king I know. You may even become the greatest king in history. Compared to you, Robert Baratheon is a tragic sight. Thank you for letting me understand this, but the king of Beyond the Great Wall is different from the rulers of the Seven Kingdoms. There are some things that you can decide on your own, but I..." Sigh. He shook his head and did not continue. Dany glanced at the barbarians around her. Some were confused, some were arrogant, some had flickering eyes. There were all kinds of expressions, but few were submissive. She immediately understood his difficulties. Mansred was most likely convinced by her words, and had the idea of surrendering to preserve the barbarian race. However, the barbarian tribe was formed by the common goal of invading the Seven Kingdoms. He could not change the barbarians' strategic goal, and could not persuade them to surrender to the kneeling man. You have seen Robert? She decided to change the topic and ease the atmosphere. The other party has me and Targaryen, but not only Targaryen. A straightforward person does not resort to insinuations. The person sitting on the Iron Throne now is not me. Winter is coming, and the other ghosts are wreaking havoc beyond the Great Wall. I cannot add to the natural disaster. Before the next summer, I will definitely not challenge the position of ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. This will inevitably cause the composition of the third party outside of the Night Watchers and the Freedmen to be extremely complicated. Today, I am the only representative of the third party. Perhaps tomorrow there will be Theon Byra, Bolton the day after that, and even Lannister the day after that. In this regard, I promise you that Targaryen will not interfere with the dealings between the Freedmen, the Night Watchers, and the other lords of the Seven Kingdoms. In this three-way meeting, the third party only represents Targaryen, and Targaryen will resolutely fulfill his obligations. Finally, Dany looked around and asked everyone, "Do you understand?" "Understood." Jon, Sir Mallister, and Sir Glendon nodded in response. "Understood." Tormund nodded as well. I understand." The Savage leaders also expressed their opinions. Mansred frowned and said, "I don't know the contents of your three-way lease treaty, but what if the other vassals interfere with our agreement with you? This will require the other party of the three, the Night Watchers, to step in." Dany pointed at the three Night Watchers representatives. "They don't need to use force to uphold our treaty, but they need to step in and judge whether the vassals' interference is reasonable. For example, there is a clause in the three-way treaty that allows the freedmen to farm new land given by the Night Watchers. At my request, the Night Watchers reluctantly agreed. However, when the vassals of the Seven Kingdoms arrive, they will likely raise different opinions. If the Night Watchers are pressured to agree with the decision of the vassals of the Seven Kingdoms, Targaryen and the freedmen can only admit defeat. Alternatively, I will provide an alternative, or I will compensate with gold royals, or we will break up and the treaty will be annulled. If the interference of the vassals is unreasonable, for example, there is another clause in the three-way treaty. If the freedmen are hired by the Night Watchers, I will compensate the freedmen with food and gold. If the vassals want to rob you of your food and gold, and the Night Watchers decide that their actions are unreasonable, there is no need for the freedmen to step in. I will help you deal with them and use my force to ensure that the treaty is enforced. The right to speak is in the hands of the Night Watchers. What if they deliberately take sides?" Tormund frowned. Dany said firmly, "I believe in the wisdom and honor of the Night Watchers."
Chapter 304. Like I said, I won't force any of the free people. Some of them are willing to follow me to the land of long summer for the winter, but there will definitely be some who are unwilling to leave their homeland. The second rule was specially prepared for them. The Night Watchers would rent large castles and new and old lands to the freedmen who stayed behind to guard the Great Wall. The freedmen would have houses and fields, and their lives would be guaranteed. Targaryen paid the Night's Watch rent for the freedmen, and the Night's Watch did not lose out in exchange for barren fields and deserted castles. The free people rented out valiant guards from the Great Wall to deal with the surprise attacks of the deviant ghosts. Not only did they protect the people of the seven countries, they also protected themselves and their families. The Great Wall had 19 defensive fortresses. Other than Black Castle, East Sea Watch, and Shadow Tower, there were 16 other castles. Living in these castles, the barbarians naturally began to perform their duties as Night Watchers. As for the land, when the Night Watchman was first established, the king of the northern region gave the Night Watchman 125 kilometers of land south of the Great Wall as a source of income. Speaking of which, Dany wasn't the first dragon king to be received by the Night Watchers. More than 200 years ago, King Rui and Queen Elisa rode their dragons to the north, all the way to the Great Wall. Because she admired the bravery of the Night Watchman, the queen persuaded her husband to double the land of the night watchman and expand it by another 125 kilometers to the south. That Alisanne, who often did good deeds, and was called kind, was a typical white lotus flower. At least, that was what Duke Stark thought at that time, because the land that was given out belonged to the king of the Northern Territory. The Great Wall is 500 kilometers long, and the land in the south will only be wider from east to west. So, the land given to the Night Watchers is more than 125,000 square kilometers. It is bigger than South Korea, 100,000 square kilometers. But there were only 700 or 800 Night Watchers left. How could they manage them all? Other than the hills and farmlands rented by farmers, more than 90% of the land was empty. At first, Dany didn't think of renting the land to the savages. After all, the weather was so cold. Although winter hadn't officially arrived yet, it was snowing every few days. What could they grow? No matter how cold-resistant the winter wheat was, it couldn't wait until spring. The next spring was at least 5 years away. It was Jon who reminded her that if she couldn't plant wheat, she could plant winter vegetables such as cabbage, onions, garlic sprouts, and carrots. He could even take a gamble and try to plant a patch of turnips. Perhaps he could harvest a batch of food before winter arrived. Other than crops, they could also engage in animal husbandry. The pine cones could be fed to pigs, and the cold-resistant weeds could be used to raise cattle and horses. Although the winter in the northern region was cold, it was not polar night. There was still sunlight shining down. Scholar Ymont also requested Dany to order a batch of glass from Mill so that they could grow vegetables in greenhouses under the Great Wall. There were glass greenhouses in Winterfell, and fresh fruits and vegetables could be eaten in winter. Because the main castle was built on top of a hot spring, Stark even diverted the hot spring water to act as a heater for the castle. Of course. Winter is coming. We won't be able to fill our stomachs if we only farm here. I'll transport some food from Urso, Dany continued. Well, you're helping us pay the rent and land rent, and at the same time, you're delivering food to us. This is worrying again. Thurn Magna scratched his oily head in annoyance.
You. Dana's eyes widened, and she said in disbelief, "You want to surrender?" Yes, I was convinced by that woman, and I plan to surrender. After saying this, the King of Savages felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, and his body relaxed. Dana slowly calmed down, and gently stroked her husband's cheek. She asked, "How did she convince you? With a dragon?" "No, something even more terrifying than a dragon." "What's more terrifying than a dragon?" "Reason." Mans read bitterly. She used simple and common language to explain a reason that changed my worldview. That reason made me understand one thing. The ideal I'm working hard to pursue now has no meaning to the free people beyond the Great Wall. It may even lead to the destruction of the people who trust me. Dana, the title of King Beyond the Great Wall doesn't bring me much power, only responsibility. If I can be sure that the woman can bring a better future to the free people, should I give up my hostility and support her instead? The King of Savages looked into his wife's eyes and asked for help, as if her answer could help him get rid of his confusion. "I believe you," Dana said with a smile. With just a simple sentence, Mans Red was like a car that was fully charged, and it started running again with great vigor. She could have easily disintegrated our troops and helped the Westeros to solve the crisis of the Freemen invading the south. But she chose to negotiate. She chose the most complicated, time-consuming, and money-consuming method to help us survive the winter and avoid the invasion of the other ghosts. I think her actions can be called benevolence. Valamir, what kind of person do you think she is? A soft-hearted, cowardly woman. The six forms people laughed. Mance saw that many of the barbarians were nodding in agreement. He could not help but think of a sad question. Were the freemen beyond the Great Wall really a civilization that should be eliminated? The corner of Barristan's mouth twitched. The Dragon Queen's enemies had made many comments about her, but they had never said that she was cowardly or soft-hearted. The Gith, the Volantis, the Leezy, the Quills. Most people in the world would laugh their heads off if they heard what you said, he said to the shapeshifter with a straight face. Mance said, Valamir, you should at least admit that she is soft-hearted. A soft-hearted person would not trick you into entering the Great Wall and let the dragon eat you, right? Humph, Mance, have you forgotten? To the freeman, being bound and enslaved is far more terrifying than death, the Six Forms people retorted. That's because you've never experienced the horrors of hunger and cold. You've never worried about food and water, but we all know that the food we have now is not enough to feed all the savages. Mons suddenly stopped talking because the way some of the savages looked at him had changed. They were filled with suspicion and malice. Do as you wish. It's all up to you. He said this and lay down on the chair without saying anything else. Seeing that the sky was getting dark, and that a tribe of barbarians who were willing to be the guinea pigs did not appear, Tormund became anxious. He pulled a few of the tribe leaders to discuss for a while. In the end, a group of widows who had lost their husbands but had children to support were selected from their tribes. They formed a group of about 1,000 orphans and widows with orphans under the age of 10. These people were a complete burden to the barbarians, and they were not afraid of sacrificing them. Similarly, the Night Watchers could accept them without worry. 10 spear-wielding women with children were the representatives. They pressed their bloody fingerprints on the tripartite lease agreement. Yes, they used a knife to cut their thumbs and left a mark on the snow-white sheepskin scroll. Beside it were the signatures of Dany and more than 10 high-ranking members of the Night Watchers. The sacred contract was signed. That night, the barbarians of the Great Wall left the camp of the barbarians beyond the Great Wall. The spear-wielding women pushed the sleigh and followed the Night Watchers down the city wall. Piled on the sleigh were moldy furs, tattered tents, dirty sleeping bags, a few meat bones, a small bag of barley, and one or several children who were crawling around. There were also hundreds of boys and girls in ragged clothes with blank expressions on their faces. They held hands and stretched the line very, very long. Woo! This time, when the barbarians arrived, the horn that represented the return of the Night Watchers only sounded once. However, not all of the barbarians in the Great Wall wanted to enter. Some chose to rent themselves to the Night Watchers, some were willing to rent the land gifted by the Night Watchers to farm, and some were more willing to trust the queen who rode the fire-breathing Megalosaurus. Tall boys were selected by the Night Watchers to become the new Night Watchers or to do chores for the Night Watchers. Little girls without parents could not farm or stay in Dark Castle. They could only follow the King of the Great Wall to the other side of the narrow sea to make a living. A noble knight holding a black dagger piercing through the red heart flag was slapped into a pile of meat paste along with his horse. Then the giant snow bear rushed into the squad of knights. Its sharp claws flashed as it went on a killing spree. Its snow-white fur was stained with blood, some from the enemy and some from itself. A squad of 20 knights was wiped out in half a cup of tea's time. But when the giant snow bear ran to the next squad, a shocking scene occurred. A red-haired woman in a red robe rode a horse in front of the giant snow bear as if she was taking a stroll in the park. She only glanced at the snow bear before she continued to move forward. Boom! The snow bear seemed to have been drenched in a rain of gasoline and then set ablaze by a lighter. Its huge body was instantly enveloped in yellow flames. Roar! The giant snow bear roared as it rolled on the ground. Even the Night Watchers on the city walls could clearly feel its pain and anger. But no matter how it struggled, the flames showed no signs of extinguishing. Instead, it set the nearby tents and trees ablaze. But in Dany's ears, she also heard another person's voice. It was a man's wail, a wail that came from his soul. Chirp! The goshawk flew through the clouds and under the blue sky. It was like a sharp arrow piercing towards the red-haired woman in a fluttering red robe. At the same time, 3 gray wolves and a shadow lynx the size of a warhorse ran quickly through the crowd, silently sneaking to the side of the red-robed priestess. The moment the goshawk, cat and 3 wolves pounced towards the red-robed woman from the ground and the air, time seemed to have slowed down. From the perspective of the dragon spirit, Danny could even see the mocking smile on the priestess' lips. Boom 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 boom. With a light wave of her sleeve, the 4 beasts on the ground and the goshawk 500 meters in the air were set ablaze at the same time. Roar! The man's soul howled again, filled with hatred and despair. The goshawk turned into a ball of fire and smashed into the forest. The 3 wolves and shadow lynx only had a small part of their bodies covered in yellow flames as they fled into the depths of the snow forest while howling. What happened? Why did the giant bear and the goshawk burst into flames? Professor Perestan was puzzled. Danny glanced at him and said with contempt, "Don't you still have the Valeglia steel chainring hanging on your chest? You didn't even notice such an exciting and intense battle between mages?" Mage? Shapeshifters? The old man asked. The strongest shapeshifters of the barbarians, the 6 forms person, fought against the Red Priestess of Stannis. The 6 forms person lost miserably and was almost unable to retaliate. Danny said calmly. "Ah, how tragic." The Night Watcher suddenly shouted. It turned out that the heavy cavalry had pierced through the barbarians' cavalry and infantry and crashed into the group of giants behind them. Like a naughty child playing with a doll, the giants easily lifted the armored cavalry from the horses' back, pulled off their heads and broke their arms. One of the giants, who was 4 meters tall, lifted the heavy cavalry's legs with both hands and pulled with all his might. Red blood, green intestines, and brown liver flowed into the giant's bloody mouth. Roar! The giant chewed on the innards of the cavalry and pulled with both hands. The corpses on both sides hit 2 of the heavy cavalry like cannonballs. The horses neighed and flew back 4 to 5 steps. Stannis' 3 cavalry units, including the footmen without horses, had a total of less than 1,500 people. There were only 200 heavy cavalry units in the middle that were responsible for holding off the barbarians' main force. However, there were more than 100 mammoth cavalry units and more than 300 footmen running barefoot. The heavy cavalry units against the barbarians' light cavalry and footmen who were armed with wooden sticks and bronze weapons was like a tiger in a flock of sheep. It was like an iron pot smashing into a glass bottle. However, when faced with the real heavy giant footmen, just one collision was like an iron pot hitting a hydraulic press. Bang! The giant swung the tree trunk in his hand and a cavalry unit flew at least 12 meters high like a baseball from one end of the battlefield to the other. The giants are so scary. Stannis' heavy cavalry units are done for, Sir Mallister said with a pale face. In less than 10 minutes, the last heavy cavalry unit was also torn apart by the giants. Nearly 200 heavy cavalry units were wiped out and the giants only lost 2 small men who were only 3 meters tall. Roar! The giant's gray hair was stained with blood and he roared angrily in the direction of the Great Wall. Those idiots still think that a certain queen betrayed them and ambushed the barbarians' camp. Well, the barbarians' camp was indeed filled with the slogan, "Dragon Queen's Shameless Ambush." However, after seeing the flaming red stag flag, most of the barbarians gradually fell silent. Even if they did not understand the meaning of the flaming red stag flag, they could tell that it was not a 3-headed dragon. "Your Majesty, should we go and save them?" Bowen Marcy leaned over and asked softly. "Save who?" The giants are ferocious. I think the barbarians are going to turn the tables." The chief of Red Pomegranate huffed. The barbarians are our potential allies, but Stannis is our clear enemy. I didn't ride my dragon down and spray that guy's face with dragon flame because I was giving you Night Watcher's face. I didn't want to fight for power on the neutral Great Wall. Chapter 308. My Lord Steward, look! Sir Glendon exclaimed. The giants are in disarray. His Majesty Stannis is so powerful, he personally led the team to disperse the mammoth cavalry. Seeing the heavy cavalry being destroyed in the blink of an eye, the huge flaming red heart flag immediately changed direction. A team of knights in a wedge-shaped formation, mounted on armored warhorses, bravely charged towards the giants. Stannis was the most eye-catching leader. He wore black armor and a black helmet, and his golden cape with a red heart embroidered on it fluttered like a flag. He held a long sword that radiated a magical red light. Flames flashed in the midst of the giants, creating a bloodbath. The long sword burned fiercely, and the flames at the tip of the sword flickered. The short flames were 4 to 5 feet long, and the long flames were 10 feet long. Occasionally, it would strike a giant and ignite half of the giant's body. The fearless giants seemed to be frightened by the flaming magic sword that radiated a strange light. Although none of the giants died under Stannis' sword, they lost their courage in an instant. They could only scream and run away, without any thoughts of turning around to attack the enemy. Less than 500 knights were chasing after 100 mammoth cavalry and 300 giant foot soldiers. It was a complete mess. Good. The night watchers felt their blood boil as they cheered excitedly. It was as if they had become one of the brave knights chasing after the giants. There was even a group of people who shouted rebellious slogans such as "Long live King Stannis." Sir Mallister frowned and said doubtfully, "Strange, why are the giants so useless? They dared to chase after the fire-breathing megalosaurus, why would they be afraid of the magic sword that radiates a strange red light?" Professor Pereston's face darkened. "That is the Lightbringer, the weapon used by the legendary hero Asal Ahai to end the Long Night. There are also rumors that Stannis is the child of prophecy, the reincarnation of Asal Ahai. I used to scoff at these rumors, but now..." Dany stared suspiciously at the red-robed woman who was running alongside Stannis. Stannis's Lightbringer was indeed bursting with red light, and a flaming sword aura that was 2 to 3 meters long flew out. However, it only burned the giants until they screamed in pain. It did not have the flying limbs of Abyss Annihilation when she charged into the 5 element flags with the heavenly sword. "Don't you think that the Radiant Envoy is too weak?" she could not help but ask. "That's weak." Even the giants were forced to flee in panic. "I don't think dragon flames are anything special," Slater exclaimed. Dany glanced meaningfully at the guy who had never seen the dragon flame. She left the battlements and walked towards Dahe, who was lying on the ground meditating. After condensing the meditation rune in the Sea of Spirit, Blackie's requirement for food was much lower. Whenever it was free, it would immerse itself in the strange meditation rune in the Sea of Spirit. As soon as the horn sounded, Barristan, who was sitting behind a wooden table in the empty space of the camp and waiting for the tribe of savages to come over to sign the contract, stood up alertly and climbed onto the table to look into the distance. Just like Dany, he guessed that they were just bait when he saw the scattered cavalry slowly approaching the campsite. The reason was simple. There were no more than 800 night watchers at the Great Wall, and they were scattered in Dark Castle, East Sea Watch, and Shadow Tower. The 300 night watchers from Dark Castle would never break the agreement between the Queen and the barbarians. Therefore, the cavalry coming over were either from Shadow Tower or East Sea Watch. The total number of cavalry from those two places did not exceed 200. The cavalry were never idiots. Less than 100 people dared to attack the barbarians' campsite. They must be bait. There was a large army behind them, and that army was not an ally of the Targaryens. In fact, none of the vassals of the 7 kingdoms were the Queen's allies. Therefore, White Knight immediately pulled Jon and prepared to escape. Since the other party dared to take the initiative to attack the barbarians' campsite, they must have the confidence to win. He deeply understood one thing. No matter how much the Queen wanted to subdue these barbarians, it was impossible for her to help the barbarians stop the attacking army before the agreement was signed. She had no position. If she really did that, she would violate the oath she made to the Night Watchers that day. She would never treat the Great Wall as a battlefield for power games. She would not take the initiative to provoke any army that came to the Great Wall, no matter what grudges they had with the Targaryens. If you are not stupid, you should understand that they can't be Targaryens. Barristan said loudly to Mons and the leader of the barbarians. The other party came with ill intentions. If you trust me and Queen Dany, please follow me to the new camp immediately. I promise on behalf of the Queen that I will not take advantage of the situation and force you to sign the tripartite lease agreement. As a guest, I will only provide Her Majesty with a reason to protect you from the other vassals of the Seven Kingdoms. The ones who attacked the campsite were the Rangers. You broke your oath and attacked. We will no longer trust the Raven and the Mother of Dragons, a barbarian shouted. The Hexagon Valamir stared at the old knight viciously and said in a dark voice, they deliberately used negotiations to make us lower our guard. These two idiots are abandoned pawns. Mons, let me kill them. Barristan was so angry that he laughed. He stared straight at the gloomy king and said, Mons, I don't understand this shapeshifter. Don't you know my identity? Abandoning the captain of the Kingsguard just to attack you? Do you think that Her Majesty's 2 dragons are decorations? Or do you think that a megalosaurus kills faster than a sword? She doesn't intend to stop those people. Mons' expression was ugly. It was not because he believed the hexagon, but because he guessed the Dragon Queen's attitude towards this matter from Barristan's reaction. If you sign the contract immediately, Mons raised his hand and interrupted him. We will take your words as a threat. The freemen will be even more disgusted by the agreement. I know, that's why I didn't intend to mention this at all. The old knight smiled bitterly and shook his head. You also understand the current political situation of the Seven Kingdoms. If the Queen helps the freemen deal with the vassals who come to the Great Wall, not a single soldier, a single grain of wheat, or a single copper coin will be sent to the Great Wall in the future. The barbarians were never the reason for Her Majesty to come to the Great Wall. The deviants are our real enemy. We need the Seven Kingdoms to unite and deal with them together. This is also why Her Majesty has always been tolerant of the freemen. You are also an important force against the deviants. I understand. Mons slowly exhaled. As he put on his leather armor, chain mail, and raven-winged helmet, he ordered loudly, Hamo, lead the raiders to mount and form a cavalry. Tormund, form 3 rows of spears with your son. Wang Wang, blow the horn and summon the giants. Valamir, hide in the forest and use your animal companions to help us tear apart the bastards who have broken into the camp. Snow, you lead. At the end, he turned around and said to the White Knight who was about to climb onto his horse and leave, my wife is about to give birth. Please take her to the new camp and ask Master Ymont to help take care of her. After a pause, Mons pointed at the simple wooden fence beside the camp and smiled bitterly. I have been thinking about how to deter the megalosaurus flying in the sky. The barricades and other defensive measures against the megalosaurus are ineffective against the megalosaurus. This is bad. Sir Barristan, take as many women and children as you can from the camp. Wail, wail. Mons shouted at his white bearskin tent. When a tall blonde woman in animal skin lifted the curtain and walked out, he said loudly, wail, the camp did not prepare any barricades. The cavalry might charge in. Cooperate with Sir Barristan and Jon Snow and bring Dana and the women and children to the new camp. At first, Wael and Jon rode their horses and shouted loudly in the camp. Not many of the barbarians ran to the new camp. However, when the first cavalry unit charged into the camp and set the tents on fire with fire arrows, the men, women, elderly, and children all ran for their lives. Most of them ran aimlessly. They ran into the forest and ran into the hooves of the enemy's horses. When they saw some people running down the wall, a group of them immediately ran in that direction. The new camp at the base of the wall was opposite the barbarians' camp. The outer fence was less than 600 yards away. Even the children could reach it in 2 minutes. By the time Stannis chased the giants into the forest, the new camp was already full of people. The new camp was a temporary base for the settlers. When the number of barbarians reached 5,000, they began to move to Eastwatch. Therefore, the maximum number of people in this camp was 5,000. Many of the barbarians were herding sheep, sled dogs, pigs, chickens, ducks, and other livestock. Such a large group of barbarians naturally attracted the attention of Stannis's cavalry. However, the flag at the gate of the camp made them hesitate. The flag of the red dragon on a black background represented the former royal family, the Targaryens. When Stannis and his army completely defeated the giants and the barbarians were left without any resistance, a group of riders finally came to the gate of the camp with the flag of the Red Heart of Fire. "I am Sir Gordy Farron, a subordinate of King Stannis." A young and powerful voice came from under the visor. He shouted at the night watchers outside the camp gate, "You are the night watchers. Why are you helping the tyrant and stopping the king's army?" Jon stepped forward and explained, "Sir Gordy Farron, this camp belongs to Queen Dany Liss. In fact, how dare you?" Before Jon could finish, Gordy Farron shouted and raised his bloody longsword at the night watchers, "Do you want to be a traitor? There is only one legitimate king in the Seven Kingdoms, and that is King Stannis. She is a Targaryen, a dragon, a megalosaurus, a true dragon." Toad shouted behind Jon. Gordy Farron waved his sword as if he wanted to cut Toad and his rebellious words in half. He declared loudly, "Only King Stannis is a true dragon. Without Dany Liss, the Targaryens have been completely destroyed. Get out of the way, or I will execute all of you for treason." The 100 or so knights behind him also pointed their long swords at the night watchers, issuing a silent but real threat. Jon frowned, "Sir, before your arrival, the barbarians beyond the wall were no longer a threat. Instead, they might become our allies." The night watchers colluding with the barbarians? He admitted it. "Kill!" Gordy Farron kicked his horse's belly and was about to speed up towards the camp. Squawk! The never-before-heard roar of a beast caused the hearts of the knights and their horses to tremble. As soon as they looked up, they saw a ferocious beast that had walked out of a nightmare and was charging towards them. "Dragon, it really is a dragon!" The knight screamed in horror. His voice was shrill and filled with fear and despair. Boom! The bright red dragon flames descended upon the world like a pillar of fire. The night watchers on the Great Wall were livened up, or it could be said that subduing the barbarians was never their first choice. Stannis' straightforward method was more hot-blooded, more satisfying, and also more able to vent the thousands of years of hatred between the night watchers and the barbarians. Thus, they began to shout along with the knights below the Great Wall. "Victory! Victory!" When gaudy Fallon waved the flag of Red Heart and loudly shouted, "Long live Stannis, long live King Stannis," everyone followed suit. Sir Mallister, who was walking towards the battlefield, stopped in his tracks and said to the people beside him with a bitter smile, "This is going to be difficult. It won't be easy to mediate between these two families." The Red Pomegranate chief steward said worriedly, "We can't let them fight. Even if they fight, they can't fight on the Great Wall. Master Ymont, what do you think?" Sir Alliser looked at the old scholar. Ymont had been staring at the megalosaurus soaring in the sky. In fact, he had been spending a lot of time in the past few days staring at the two dragons as if he couldn't get enough of them. "Don't worry, Her Majesty Dany Alice won't start a civil war. Under normal circumstances, His Majesty Stannis won't take the initiative to provoke her," the old man said softly. The one-armed tanner shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "I'm afraid it's not that optimistic. I know the three brothers too well. If Robert was real steel, then Renly was shiny copper. They looked beautiful, but they weren't worth much in reality. As for Stannis, he's a piece of pure iron. He's black, hard, and strong, but he's also easily damaged. Like iron, he'll break before he bends. If it's Robert, he'll lead his army and charge at the Megalosaurus. If he's not dead, he'll probably surrender to her and be a valiant general on the battlefield. If it's Renly, there's no need to fight. As long as she promises to keep everything he has, he'll surrender immediately and continue his life as the Duke of Storm's End, but if it's really those two, they probably won't come to the Great Wall's rescue. Robert is wasted in wine and women, and Renly has no feelings for the country's crisis. Only Stannis is strict with himself and treats others harshly. He has a stubborn sense of responsibility. His ambition for power is undeniable, but it's more like an obsession for everyone's heartfelt approval. When he was the acting castellan of Storm's End, even when food ran out and he could only eat boiled rats and leather, he never thought of surrendering. When he became Robert's Lord of the Navy. After a pause, the blacksmith skipped over the matter of Stannis leading the navy to besiege Dragonstone Island. When he settled Balon's rebellion and helped Robert rule the country, he was strict with the law and did not care about others' feelings. Even when he was cursed by all the nobles, he still did his duty and worked hard to complete his duties. If he thinks of himself as a subject, he'll perfectly fulfill his duties as a subject. If he defines himself as a king, then he'll definitely insist on the rights and responsibilities of a king. Unfortunately, not only does he think of himself as the only legitimate king of the Seven Kingdoms, he's also been bewitched by the Red God priest to think that he's the child of prophecy, the savior. There's no doubt that he'll work hard to bear the burden of being the savior even if none of us are willing to be saved by him. The savior is here. Slynt rubbed his nose and reminded. The rumbling of horse hooves approached. A group of cavalrymen waving the flag of the Red Heart slowly approached the night watchers. Greetings, King Stannis. Thank you. Seeing Stannis enter the city gate under the escort of the night watchers, Dany also ended her flight to show off her martial prowess. She brought Blackie and Whitey to land in front of the Imperial Tower. She sat on Blackie's back and watched as Stannis and the red-robed woman walked out of the city gate. As if worried that she would kill Erlu with a mouthful of dragon flames, Scholar Ymont even came over to advise her in advance. The Night Watchers hope that you two can get along peacefully and fight against the other ghosts. Stannis is always here to guard the Great Wall. Look at the big picture. Targaryen, your words are as heavy as a mountain, you said it yourself. To be honest, Dany really wanted to throw a fireball of dragon flames at Erlu. It wasn't that she wanted to kill him. If she really wanted to kill this competitor, she would have already done it outside the city. The main reason was that she really wanted to see Melisandre's fire witchcraft. Or, she could let Erlu try using the Radiant Bringer to split the fireball and see if the legendary, wife-sacrificing sword lived up to its name. The second son of the Lu family was born with broad shoulders and strong limbs. He had black hair and blue eyes. His skin was as hard as iron after being exposed to the sun for a long time. He was 36 years old and severely bald. He had a square chin and sunken cheekbones. His thin lips were tightly pursed. One look and one could tell that he was a difficult person to get along with. Erlu was in front and Melisandre followed closely behind. The moment she appeared, the surrounding night watchers let out a gasp of surprise at her beauty and sexiness. Compared to the Night Queen, who was always clad in grey iron armor, the voluptuous red-robed woman with a graceful figure and light clothes was more attractive. However, in Dany's eyes, Melisandre was like a ball of red, flirtatious flames. Her flushed heart-shaped face, red eyes, red hair that reached her waist and red robes. Even from 7 to 8 meters away, she could feel that her body was like a burning furnace, emitting waves of heat. The heat was real. It was not an illusion, nor was it magic. Even ordinary people could feel the heat from her body. Just like her dragon, her blood and fire came from the same source. Her body was also made of magic and emitted heat unconsciously. However, when it came to a fire mage, what kind of witchcraft did it represent? As soon as Stannis and Melisandre entered the yard, they noticed the Megalosaurus breathing out smoke and fire and Dany watching them from the back of the Megalosaurus. For a moment, the air seemed to be heavy. Melisandre, Red Pomegranate and the other night watchers looked nervous and sweaty. Their mouths opened and closed, but no words came out. Erlu did not avoid Dany's gaze, nor was he affected by the awkward and heavy atmosphere. He went straight to the king's tower and said while biting his cheek, "I didn't expect you to come to the Great Wall." Dany smiled and said, "I don't care about the barbarians." However, compared to the ES god who preaches death and coldness, the deviant ghosts are not worth mentioning. Then, we can only rely on the children of prophecy. The ES god you're talking about is the old gods? Danny frowned. I know that the great king of light is the only one and sees all the gods and sects as heresy. However, we're just mortals. We don't participate in the battle of the gods. We only need to deal with the deviant ghosts. Danny Alice, you're very extraordinary among mortals, but your mortal eyes still can't see through the fog, Melisandre said slowly. Your Majesties, and all the knights, the snow is melting outside, and it's a little cold. Why don't we go to the hall and sit by the fireplace to discuss the settlement of the wildlings? One-armed Tanner suggested. Old Yamant frowned and said, King Stannis just led his subordinates in a big battle. I'm afraid he didn't rest much last night. There are also soldiers who died in battle. The corpses in the wild can't be left there. Why don't we rest for a day and let the soldiers treat their injuries? The corpses outside the city should also be burned immediately. We'll hold an official meeting tomorrow. Yes, the corpses must be burned before dark. Otherwise, we won't be able to find them tomorrow, Ygritte said. You are? Stannis coldly glanced at the wildlings and giants in the yard. They were clearly different from the Night Watchers. Why aren't you locked up? You're not even wearing chains. Yes, I'm a prisoner of war. I was captured by the Dragon Queen. Ygritte rubbed her flat nose and smiled, revealing her uneven white teeth. With a dragon watching from the side, we wouldn't dare to rebel. We're helping the ravens to build the wall. It's not convenient to work with chains on. After Redhead's reminder, Stannis noticed that there was an additional curved stone wall around Dark Castle. The foundation was still being laid, and the wall hadn't been built yet. Stannis's face turned serious. His eyes were like small lanterns. He roared at Red Pomegranate, the Night Watchers aren't allowed to build a wall. Are you trying to rebel by building a wall? Bowen Marcy's face turned pale. He said with a trembling voice, yes, it was Her Majesty Danny Alice who ordered us to build it. Danny explained, last time, only 150 raiders almost took down Dark Castle. If the deviants follow suit, the Night Watchers will be finished. Deviants can climb over the wall? Stannis frowned. I don't know, but deviants are intelligent. Even the resurrected ghouls retain their memories. They pretend to be corpses and are brought into the wall by the Night Watchers. Then they get up in the middle of the night to attack Commander Mormont. Deviants were much smarter than zombies. When the Night Watchers didn't know about them, they deliberately arranged a few ghouls to pretend to be corpses at the gate of the wall. The Night Watchers naturally had to bring their brothers' bodies back to be buried. As long as I wear armor, I will not be afraid even if 10 knights surround me. As she spoke, she dispersed the dragon's aura and returned to her purple eyes. 7 gods above, I did not expect there to be a dragon spirit state. I always thought that the Dreamwalker Danny C. was the most powerful and mysterious dragon king. Old Yamant widened his eyes and looked at Danny in surprise. That is a dragon dream. I can do it too. Danny smiled proudly. Dragon dreams are divided into 2 types, conscious and unconscious. In the unconscious state, I can see some fragments of the future. Of course, like the glass candle, most of the scenes are illusions. Before Blackie and the other 3 dragons were born, I have seen the black dragons in my dreams. In fact, the 5 dragon eggs in my hands, including the red dragon egg in my bedroom, can all meet them in my dreams. That is amazing. Our ancestors have never had a dragon king as gifted as you. Yamant said excitedly. Why would they care about this trivial matter? That's why I have to warn you. Old Yamant's expression became serious. You have to leave the wall as soon as possible. Other than Sir Barristan and me, there is no one you can completely trust here. Just like just now, if you enter the city gate alone and someone shoots at you with crossbows from the killing hole above, calling for the Megalosaurus won't help. Also, Master Tanner, he suggested that you and Stannis go to the hall for a meeting. I deliberately found an excuse to help you decline. He may not have any bad intentions, but if you really enter the main hall of the castle, there may be hundreds of knights who will immediately attack you. In short, before you bring a large group of trusted people here, never face Stannis alone, don't test his humanity, and even. Old Yamont's eyes were sad, and his tone was sad. Since Stannis came to the wall, he could not even trust the Night Watchers. I think my performance is not bad, Dany said with a gloomy expression. Your three-way lease is almost perfect. To be honest, I'm glad that you can be kind to the barbarians. Old Yamont smiled with relief, and then shook his head and sighed. But the Night Watchers and the barbarians have an 8,000-year blood feud. When the Raiders and the Night Watchers fall into each other's hands, their humanity will be completely suppressed by their bestial nature and hatred. Being beheaded is the best outcome. Before Stannis came, you were the only savior of the wall. They had no choice but to listen to you. But without a doubt, the way Stannis dealt with the barbarians was more approved by the Night Watchers. After a pause, the old man sighed. 4 days ago, on the night you came to the wall, I sent a messenger crow to Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower, telling them that the Targaryen Dragon King had come to the wall's rescue. Stannis must have arrived at Eastwatch by then, but Scholar Hamuin did not reveal any information to Dark Castle. As the commander of Eastwatch, Carter Pike personally led the Rangers to attack the barbarians' camp with Stannis. They do not know about the dragon spirit, the mother of dragons. I did not expect you to have such a close relationship with dragons. But everyone knows that dragons only have one rider. When that rider dies, the dragon will accept a new knight. I can even guess what some people are thinking. If they kill you and let someone more familiar with the bloodline of a true dragon inherit your dragon, the conflict and killing of Westeros will be reduced by 90%. The Targaryens have an irreconcilable blood feud with 5 of the Dukes of the 7 Kingdoms. Old Yamont said bitterly. Killing you is equivalent to saving the Westeros. Killing you is a righteous act. Dany, let's go. Leave tonight. No, leave now. You've completed your mission. Dany was silent for a long time before she asked, after I leave, what about the barbarians? Let Sir Barristan stay. He is your captain of the Kingsguard. He can sign the sacred contract on your behalf. Dany was struggling. Rationally, she agreed with old Yamont's suggestion to leave immediately. Also, there was a voice in her subconscious that reminded her that there was something important waiting for her in Ursos. But she was still worried about the threat of the other ghosts. She did not want to leave just like that. After a moment of hesitation, she said, Stannis and his 1,000 men will not be able to stop the army of other ghosts. I will take the barbarians to the forest tomorrow to look for the ghouls. When we catch the ghouls, I will leave immediately and have the Night Watchers send them to the King's Landing and to the Old Town. I will ask the nobles of the 7 kingdoms to end the war and support the wall. Will it be dangerous? We can ask Stannis's men to do it, the old scholar said worriedly. I will ride my dragon there. Besides, I also want to evaluate the abilities of the other ghosts. After chatting for a while, Guylan, the stupid bull, called for Yamont in the yard. Master Yamont, there is not enough milk of the poppy flower. Night Demon with a hole in his stomach is waiting for you to stitch it up. I will be right there, Yamont replied. He then reminded Dany again, do not go out after dark. It is hard to guard against a sneak attack. Jon is getting busier these days. He has no time to help you guard the gate. I will ask Guylan to take his place. If there is anything you need, ask him to do it. He dragged his old body to the door. Before opening it, Yamont turned around and reminded her, I almost forgot. From now on, do not accept food from anyone. If you want to eat, you can wait for Sir Barristan to return. The White Knight knows this better than I do. Do not go to the hall for dinner. I will arrange for someone to send it over. Sigh, there are so many bastards in the shallow pond. Even the allied forces of the free cities did not annoy me this much. You have a dragon. You have an absolute advantage on the battlefield. Those who are unwilling to lose can only use methods outside of the battlefield to deal with you. Even if they lose their honor and go against tradition, the Seven Kingdoms now. Old Yamant shook his head and left with a sigh. Not long after Yamant left, Yrgrit called Dany out of the door. Dragon Queen, those knights have been harassing Marg and the others, the red-haired girl said as she pointed at Godifalin. Godifalin had already taken off his helmet. He had a handsome face, a bum chin, and a short golden beard. He was in his early 20s and looked like a tough guy. However, his eyes were a little frivolous, which ruined his good looks. I just want to compete with him, Godifalin said with a smile. I heard that he is the Giant King. I killed a giant this morning and received the title of Giant Killer. If I can defeat the Giant King, I will receive more honor. The strong Marg was 3 meters tall. That day, he used his fist, knee, and shoulder to smash 3 iron fences that were as thick as an arm and an old oak door that was 10 centimeters thick. Yes, only the inner city gate was broken by him. The outer city gate was 30 centimeters thick and was smashed by a mammoth. At this moment, the giant King Marg was a little miserable. There was a white cloth wrapped around his back to his shoulder armor. There was also a large gray bedsheet that emitted the smell of herbs on his lower abdomen. He looked dispirited and weak. No wonder this stupid knight wanted to use him to become famous. Dany crossed her arms and glanced at Godifalin and his companions in disdain. She sneered, "Go find Stannis. As long as he signs that no responsibility life and death contract, any of you can challenge Marg." Godifalin looked at the big guy beside him in surprise. The giant Marg looked back at him indifferently. There was no fear. Instead, he clenched his fists and seemed to be eager to fight. Could it be that this sickly look was an act? The knight could not help but suspect. He smiled and said, "I mean a spear competition. There is no need to fight to the death. You took a seat in the latrine and stepped on a white maggot that was wriggling over. Could you control your strength and not step on it until its stomach is broken?" This disgusting and vicious comparison made the young knight explode with anger. "I killed a giant," he emphasized. Dany raised her chin and said coldly, "Before Stannis used the flaming sword, the giant tore apart more than 100 knights like you without much damage. Wake up, without that weird red sword and the red-robed witch, you wouldn't even be able to touch a single hair of the giant." Wah wah wah, wah wah wah. While they were talking, the sound of a baby crying came from outside the newly built wall and the hole in the city gate. A fat man walked over from outside the wall and pulled out his long sword. He stood behind a blonde female barbarian who was holding a crying baby. He screamed in despair, "7 gods above, Dark Castle has been conquered by the giants? Gilly, we are done for." Sam. Gilly, who was beside Dany, quickly walked over and exclaimed, "Sam, you're not dead." Gilly." Sam, who was as fat as a pig's shoulder, was stunned. He asked in confusion, "Did you guys surrender to the barbarians?" Gilly's face darkened and said in a bad mood, "We won. These giants are all captives. They are helping us repair the city." Captives? Why aren't they shackled? The people of the country have no way of making a living. As the big-breasted girl held her head high and smiled elegantly, Dany changed the topic and said, "But this kingdom that has fallen into the abyss only needed to send a destitute lord who was banished from the center of power to lead 1,000 people to penetrate the camp of 100,000 barbarians. Even the king of the barbarians was captured. What are you so proud of? In this era, no matter how bad the nobles of the 7 nations are, they can't be worse than you barbarians." Pursed her lips, her face pale. The baby on the stretcher started crying again. Although Jon agreed with the queen, he also pitied Wah-Er's situation. He pulled the fat man who was staring blankly at Blackie and Little White over and introduced him to Danny. "Your Majesty, this is Samuel Tarley, the affairs officer of Dark Castle. He has seen other ghosts and even killed a white ghost. Not a corpse ghost, but a white ghost." Sam had a round face, like a piece of fermented dough, and a pair of cowardly gray eyes. Your Majesty, your dragons are so powerful. I've always wanted to see the Megalosaurus since I was young. I didn't expect them to suddenly appear in front of me today." Fat Sam stuttered. "I've seen your father and brother." Danny looked at the sausage that looked like it was about to burst out of its casing. She laughed and said, "Your brother Dickon is a brave knight. Not long ago, he showed off at the old town's Honeywine River tournament." "Dickon?" Fat Sausage's gray eyes suddenly welled up with tears. "He's always been so brave and good at fighting. I haven't seen him for years. He's married. She's the daughter of the Mouton family in Nuquin City. I even saw your father at King's Landing. Old Tarley was so arrogant. He led 1,000 armored soldiers to massacre the great cathedral of Baylor." Danny continued. "Ah," everyone gasped. "Calm down. It didn't work. The Archbishop compromised." Then, Danny told them about Little Rose and Cersei. "I didn't expect King's Landing to be so chaotic." John murmured. "If we don't catch a deviant ghost to wake them up, it will be even more chaotic in the future." Danny sighed and turned to Fat Sam. She asked, "With your size, you can't climb the wall. How did you get across the Great Wall?" Sam had followed Mormont to the north. If they wanted to return to Dark Castle, they could only go through the north gate. However, Fat Sam came from the south. I can't say." Sam's face turned red and he said in a sobbing tone. "You can't even tell me?" "No, I can't. If you don't tell me, I'll feed you to the dragon." Danny put on a stern face and threatened. Hiss! Blackie immediately got up and stuck its neck out. Its head came to Fat Sam's face. Sparks from its nostrils fell on Fat Sam's hair, causing smoke to rise. Ah! Fat Sam's body went limp and he immediately collapsed on the ground and cried loudly. After a while, a warm smell of urine came from his crotch. Blackie glanced at him in disgust and retracted its head. "Are you going to tell me?" Danny asked again. "Don't let the dragon eat me." I won't tell you." Fat Sam cried on the ground. "Wah!" The baby in Jilly's arms also cried. Jilly's eyes were filled with fear. She begged Danny with a sobbing tone, "I'll tell you. There's a tunnel in the well that leads to the outside of the castle. Don't let the dragon eat Sam. Don't. Damn it." Danny cursed and scolded Fat Sam, "Are you stupid? How can you hide something like this? If we don't block the tunnel immediately, the north will fall immediately when the savages find out. And deviant ghosts, when they see the savages running to the Long Night Castle, won't they follow? Sob sob sob, I can't tell you. Jilly, you shouldn't tell either." Fat Sam could only cry. His face was covered in snot and tears. He looked extremely pitiful. "Sam, Her Majesty is right. If there really is a tunnel, we must block it immediately." John crouched down and held Fat Sam's shoulder. Sam pulled John's sleeve tightly and pleaded with a pleading expression, "No, John, you don't understand. Apart from the night watchers, no one can pass through that place. We can't let outsiders know either." John secretly glanced at Danny, who had a gloomy expression, and said awkwardly, "Her Majesty isn't an outsider." Danny's eyes flashed. She was about to ask again when that stupid cow, Gollin, beside her reminded her softly, "Your Majesty, the King of Savages is here." Melisandre held her hands together like a lady and hung them in front of her abdomen. Her red robe fluttered as she walked over with light steps. The mud in the courtyard smelled like she had walked out of the palace's ballroom. Behind the red-robed lady was Sir Gaudy and 2 guards with red hearts emblazoned on their chests. Mansred's brown hair was messy, and his brown weasel skin coat was stained with blood. No one knew if it was his own blood or the enemy's. "He has the king's blood." The red-robed lady walked to the side of the stretcher and was about to touch the baby's cheek. Slap! Whale rushed over aggressively and slapped the priestess' tender fingers away. He stood in front of his sister and shouted, "You can't touch my sister's child." Melisandre turned around and glanced at Jon, Dany, and Sam with a faint smile. Finally, she said to Mansred, "It's better not to meet. Even if King Stannis doesn't punish you for leading the savages south, the Night Watchers won't let a brother who breaks his oath go." Well, Mansred used to be a Night Watcher and swore an oath to Weirwood. In the opening episode of Game of Thrones, I'd cut off the head of a sloppy man with a sword of ice. That man was a defected Night Watcher. Anyone who broke their oath and fled the wall would be beheaded no matter who they were or what reason they had. When the news of Id's death at the King's Landing came, Jon fled on horseback in the middle of the night. If it weren't for Gren, Sam, and a few other friends who chased him back, Old Mormont would have cut off his head. Well, Old Mormont guessed that Jon would run away and sent someone to wait for him in front. Even though Old Bear had been grooming Jon as the successor of the commander-in-chief, he still sharpened his knife and waited for him to make his choice. Mansred smiled at the red-robed lady and walked straight to the stretcher. He leaned over and kissed his wife's pale cheek before carefully picking up the baby wrapped in a sheepskin blanket. He sighed and said, "Dragon Queen, Dana and my son aren't Stannis's captives, are they? All right, I'll register them as barbarians of the fortress later." Dany nodded in agreement. Then, she asked, "What's the child's name?" "You can give him a name." Mansred stroked the baby's wrinkled cheeks and replied, "He doesn't have a name. The custom of the free folk is that he can't be named before he's 3 years old." Jon smiled and said, "Everyone calls him Prince of the Barbarians and born on the battlefield." Born on the battlefield," Dany's mouth twitched. She couldn't help but think of her own born on the battlefield. Aren't these foreigners a little too casual with their naming? No, the free folk have a king beyond the fortress, but never a prince.